Chapter 842. The tall and sturdy Murong Longshui stared fixedly at this guy who had appeared out of nowhere. In Liang, the imperial court clamped down on the discussion, and only a few rumors managed to slip through the net. Therefore, the discussions about the crown prince of Beiliang were mostly superficial. They talked about how domineering he was in Great Peace City and how he made enemies with the students of the Imperial College. However, Beimang was completely different. It was precisely because of this guy's trip to Beimang that the world was turned upside down. Murong Longshui and the old enemy with the surname of Yelu were both interested in Liang because of him, so they personally went down south. No matter what kind of dishonorable and crooked method this person used to kill Raccoon Diwu, Murong Longshui still admired him. If she put herself in his shoes, she believed that if she went up against Tuoba Chun's son, who was protected by two great demons, the rainbow python and the lightning spear, then she would have a slim chance of survival. Murong Longshui hesitated for a moment and stared at this man of the same age who was tired from traveling and whose lips were chapped. Before a fierce battle that was destined to be a life-and-death battle, she smiled and threw the tangerine in her hand out. She thought that if this man generously accepted the tangerine and ate it before fighting, it would be a wonderful thing that could accompany drinking in the future. He naturally had a heroic demeanor of not caring about life and death. However, the tangerine had just been thrown into the air when it exploded, splashing juice all over Murong Longshui. Murong Longshui furrowed her thick brows. This crown prince of Beiliang was too petty. A man's jianghu was mostly black, white, and gray. A woman's jianghu was filled with many different thoughts. Murong Longshui was no exception. Yulu saw Murong Longshui suffer and was secretly delighted. His mind was filled with the comical scene of a handsome guy being pressed down by a 200 kilograms female warrior and beaten into a pig head. Old Moth was not as carefree as Old Moth. His footsteps were steady and he was not in a hurry. The current situation was no different from a heaven-sent opportunity for the three of them. That crown prince was being dragged down by the heavily injured young lady. It would be easier for him to fight the three of them alone. A willow leapt onto the branch of an orange tree beside him and looked into the distance, ensuring that there were no large groups of cavalry participating in the encirclement. It was better to be safe than sorry in other people's territory. After Su Fengyan landed on the ground, she took a deep breath and ran towards Murong Longshui, who was the closest to her. Along the way, she bypassed several orange trees that were bleak and desolate. Unlike Su Fengyan, she was so agile that she crashed into Su Fengyan. The two of them instantly collided. Su Fengyan pushed Murong Longshui's knee down with one hand and her 5 fingers were like hooks, slashing at Murong Longshui's thigh fiercely. The moment before the flying swords pierced into Murong Longshui's body, a willow that had been leisurely gathering branches from a distant orange tree finally made its move. It threw branches at Murong Longshui and Murong Longshui, who were in the middle of a fierce battle, accurately blocking the attacks of the flying swords. Murong Longshui crossed her arms to protect her cheeks. The orange tree was shattered inch by inch, and the sky was filled with broken branches. Murong Longshui ignored the bone-piercing pain and rushed over to Murong Longshui's chest. In the blink of an eye, Su Fengyan made a decision that would cause both of them to lose. Not only did she not pull back her fists, she planted her feet into the ground, and her fists moved smoothly. Just as all the flying swords were about to pierce into Murong Longshui's body, a willow that had been leisurely gathering branches from a distant orange tree finally made its move. It continuously threw branches at Murong Longshui and Murong Longshui, who were in the middle of a fierce battle, accurately blocking the attacks of the flying swords. Murong Longshui crossed her arms to protect her cheeks. The orange tree was shattered inch by inch, and branches and leaves filled the air. Murong Longshui ignored the bone-piercing pain and rushed over to Murong Longshui's chest. In the blink of an eye, Su Fengyan made a decision that would cause both of them to lose. Not only did she not pull back her fists, she planted her feet into the ground, and her fists moved smoothly. Just as all the flying swords were about to pierce into Murong Longshui's body, a willow that had been leisurely gathering branches from a distant orange tree finally made its move. It continuously threw branches at Murong Longshui and Murong Longshui, who were in the middle of a fierce battle, accurately blocking the attacks of the flying swords. Morong Longshui crossed her arms to protect her cheeks. The orange tree was shattered inch by inch, and the sky was filled with broken branches. Morong Longshui ignored the bone-piercing pain and rushed over to Morong Longshui's chest. Su Fengyan's fists collided with Morong Longshui's chest. She instantly made a decision that would cause both of them to suffer. Loss. Not only did she not withdraw her fists, but she also realized that the flying swords within 10 feet were like locusts. Su Fengyan pointed his forehead downwards and knocked on Su Fengyan's head. Morong Longshui's majestic body swung backwards, but his arms were held back by Su Fengyan, not giving him a chance to escape. Morong Longshui roared angrily and shook his arms, causing ripples to spread out and shake off the restraints. Su Fengyan's 10 fingers drew 10 bloody grooves on her arms so deep that her bones could be seen. Morong Longshui lowered her head, and her thigh-thick arms quickly wrapped around Su Fengyan's shoulders. If anyone saw this, they would mistake it for a lover's warm embrace, and it would be difficult to tell that there was killing intent hidden in all directions. Morong Longshui's body fell backwards, pulling Su Fengyan's entire body into the air. He tried to send Su Fengyan's head into the mud. Su Fengyan's hands gently patted on the wet mud, and in an instant, it was as if fog was rising in spirals. Morong Longshui's attempt to distance herself from Su Fengyan, and at the same time, she also wanted to throw herself under the willow's shade. Morong Longshui, who was lying in the snow and mud, let go of her hands. She wanted to get up like a carp and take the initiative earlier than Su Fengyan. Su Fengyan, who was originally head down, instantly flipped her body upside down after that pat. Both of her hands pressed against Morong Longshui's cheeks, and the two of them looked at each other. It was another scene that was brewing under the illusion of warmth. Previously, Morong Longshui had caught a tangerine that Willow had tossed to her and rolled it in his palm. This time it was exactly the same. Su Fengyan seemed to want to treat her head as an orange. Morong Longshui's expression changed drastically, and in an instant, her fists and knees were like a torrential downpour. Ever since she debuted, the extraordinary woman from Beimang, who was known for her close combat skills, actually only wanted to distance herself from Su Fengyan. However, no matter how fierce her attacks were, Su Fengyan only supported her head and closed the gap between her palms inch by inch. His body remained unmoving, and he received all of Morong Longshui's thunderous attacks. Willow, who was squatting on a branch in the distance, had an uncertain expression. He still had a handful of tangerine branches in his hand and seemed to be weighing the pros and cons. He did not immediately help the woman who was in danger. Previously, Old Moth had taken advantage of the gap to stretch his arms and wander around the tangerine forest, and no one knew what he was writing. Old Spiderweb was obviously more careful than Willow, who was watching the fire from the other side of the river. He kicked down an orange tree and stabbed it towards Su Fengyan's back. Morong Longshui, who did not dare to hold back, used all of his strength to punch Old Spiderweb's chest. Coincidentally, the tangerine tree stabbed into his back. The punch and the tree pulled each other together, and according to common sense, even if Old Spiderweb's body was like a diamond, his heart would be smashed and he would die on the spot. After Old Moth kicked out, he turned his head and glared at Willow. Willow rolled his eyes and swept to the side of Su Fengyan and Morong Longshui. However, Su Fengyan was unexpectedly unscathed. He finally took a step back and was willing to let go of Morong Longshui's big head. His hands slid down and held her cheeks up. Morong Longshui, whose body was full of qi, was lifted off the ground. Su Fengyan slowly walked to her side and swept a leg across the Beimang Commandery Princess's abdomen. Her tall and sturdy body bent in a deformed arc in the air and then shot towards Willow, who had rushed over to rescue her. Willow ignored the Commandery Princess's precious body and fell rapidly. At the same time, Old Moth put his thumb and index finger together and drew an inexplicable straight line in front of him. No less than 100 tangerine trees were uprooted and thrown at the lone Su Fengyan, and then exploded in the air. Willow's mouth curled up and his 10 fingers played the strings. He was full of sword qi. The chaotic sword qi overflowed between heaven and earth like the Milky Way flowing in reverse, forming a cage with nowhere to hide. Su Fengnian stepped out and bent his knees slightly. It was as if he was carrying a cauldron on his shoulders. His hands lifted up into the air. With him as the center, the ground of hundreds of feet was lifted up. A rising curtain of mud faced the torrential sword chi that poured down in torrents. It was like an umbrella blocking the rain. Willow held a branch with both hands and coincidentally stabbed down at the center of the umbrella above Su Fengnian's head. Making use of the opportunity, Willow's shade. Su Fengnian looked up indifferently and stared straight at the famous killer of Beimang. Willow guessed that the situation was strange and immediately stopped his attack. He would rather give up the rare opportunity than risk his life. However, just as Willow withdrew his sword, he clearly saw a scheming smile appear at the corner of that guy's mouth. In an instant, Willow stabbed down again based on intuition. When the branch in his hand touched the space between Su Fengnian's eyebrows, Willow's heart calmed down. The branch had already pierced half a fingernail into the space between his eyebrows. Willow's eyes were sinister and wild with joy. The two of them were only a few feet apart, but the branch suddenly could not move forward at all. Willow did not lose his composure and wanted to withdraw his branch. However, a person in a red robe stepped on his back fiercely. Su Fengnian's fingers touched each other and pierced Willow's chest. Then he gently tore outwards. Willow's corpse was torn apart in the air. A large pool of blood splattered on Su Fengnian's face. Su Fengnian was still expressionless and did not say anything. He only shook his wrists and silently shook off the blood on his hands. He looked at the two remaining Beimang masters in the Orange Garden. Chapter 843. Seeing a section Willow being torn apart, Old Moth was flabbergasted. The great leader of the spider web, Li Mibi, had personally given the order for the three of them to work together. There was a reason behind this. Junju Morong Longshui possessed the physique of Vajra and was an expert in close combat. Together with a section Willow, who was proficient in assassination, they were almost flawless. With the help of Old Moth, who was one of the two cocoons, he was an experienced man. He could add some icing on the cake or do some shady business to fill in the gaps. Even if they were up against two masters of the Liang Finger Mystery Realm, they could still fight. Even if a section Willow was hit by two swords and a saber, which severely damaged his combat power, Old Moth did not believe that he could break the stalemate within the time it took for a stick of incense to burn. A battle to the death between experts was not only a battle of strength but also a battle of wits. In fact, Old Moth could see some clues. At that time, a section Willow partnered with him and created a torrential rain of sword chi that poured down from the sky. Su Fengnian lifted up the ground to act as an umbrella and purposely revealed a fatal flaw at the handle of the umbrella. A section Willow also suspected that it was a trap and made a gesture of withdrawing his sword midway. However, for some unknown reason, a section Willow, who was famous for being good at capturing murderous intents, changed his mind and decisively stabbed his sword between his eyebrows. In fact, he almost succeeded. If a section Willow successfully retreated, not to mention the great merit of the spider web, it would not be difficult for the Empress to bestow a few princesses and princesses. Moreover, the tripartite balance of power between the Beimang, Liang, and Beiliang would be weakened. Old Moth never expected that he would still be fine, while the one Willow that Li Mibi valued greatly could only die in a foreign land. It wasn't that Old Moth had never crossed a quagmire situation where his hands and feet were bound. A few years ago, he had even surrounded a finger-profound realm cultivator who wasn't willing to be recruited by Northern Mang with another cocoon. That was also a life-and-death battle. A newborn calf was not afraid of a tiger, but a middle-aged man would be afraid of death, let alone an old man like Old Moth who had licked blood from the edge of a blade for most of his life. He began to miss the canary he kept in the private courtyard of Northern Mang more and more. Old Moth always liked to pinch her body until there were strings of bruises on her body. If he had known that he would encounter the crown prince of the Beiliang who relied on an otherworldly item to reach the false state of celestial phenomenon, he would have brought along the cocoon who was proficient in many kinds of finger mysterious arts. Otherwise, he would have invited Sword Aura whose real name was Sun Xiaopu. Morong Longshui sat cross-legged on the ground. The severity of his injuries could not be seen. He smiled at Su Fengnian and said, "I heard that you met Tooba Chun's son on the grassland. You were besieged by him, the thunder spear Duanbua Erwi, and the colorful python brocade sleeve man. At that time, I reckon that you had just entered the Vajra realm. Unexpectedly, you killed one of them. I believe you, but I have always been curious about how you did it. Now I somewhat understand that my trip to Liang was not in vain. Su Fengyan leisurely walked toward Old Moth and said to Morong Longshui, "That time, I was chased around like a dog. Duanbua Erwi's thunder spear even pierced a hole in my body. It was a bit miserable. But to be honest, after killing the Devil Xialing at the Duckhead Green Inn, I am not too afraid of the so-called first-grade masters. After all, I have fought with Luo Yang and the Fifth Raccoon. So, it doesn't matter whether I am a fox borrowing the tiger's might or not. I don't expect to kill all of you in one breath. But if we have to talk about who will pay a bigger price, it will definitely be you who are unfamiliar with this place after a long time." Morong Longshui stood up and said playfully, "Regarding the matter of cultivation backfeeding, there seems to be a saying that the well water does not interfere with the river water. Regarding the death of the Fifth Raccoon, I once asked the Chilan spiritual master about it. The imperial preceptor said that the well water in your body has dried up and there is not a drop left. Naturally, the water from the princess tomb's otherworldly item will flow backward. If it were someone else, their meridians would have exploded. However, I don't know if I misunderstood or if His Royal Highness is scheming against us again. He deliberately used a trick to make it seem like your well is not dry anymore. If you continue to let the Zhu robe otherworldly item instill cultivation into your well, I am afraid that it will leave irreversible sequelae. If we take risks again and again, we will eventually lose the right path of the art of war. Today, a willow horse has lost its front hooves. Tomorrow, it might be His Royal Highness who has a great king of Bailiang in his pocket." Su Fengyan stopped and said with a smile, "You can see that?" Morong Longshui was slightly stunned and seemed to be a bit annoyed. He pointed at Su Fengyan's hair and said, "Your Highness, aren't you asking the obvious? Your white hair is showing signs of turning black. Even a blind person can see it." Su Fengyan nodded and then shook his head. Using his familiar Northern Mang accent, he said, "You didn't guess wrongly. After I lost the Great Yellow Court, I finally started to recover my vitality. Logically speaking, I shouldn't create unnecessary trouble at this time. However, you, Morong Longshui, the Northern Mang princess, the precious daughter of Morong Baoding, came to Liang to assassinate me. Moreover, there was Sword Chi near Huangqing, a section of Willow, and this Cobweb Senior in front of me. I don't know why you guys didn't make a move in Great Peace City and Divine Marshal City, but you probably don't want to return empty-handed. Most likely, you guys will continue to oppose me shamelessly. Since I finally gained the upper hand today, even if I kill 1,000 enemies and lose 800 of my own men, I will still gain 200. After I return to Northern Liang, it doesn't matter whether I am a second-grade martial artist or a first-grade martial artist." Morong Longshui's eyes were sincere as he smiled and said, "To be honest, Spiderweb sent out 2 cocoons and several poles to the south this time. Their original intention was to assassinate your highness, but they were stopped in Great Peace City, so they didn't dare to act rashly. However, I didn't plan on getting involved in this mess from the start. I went south to investigate the demon Luo Yang's whereabouts and confirm whether Broken Spear Deng Mao and Yelu Dongchuang followed Luo Yang out of Beimang. After Han Diaosi was killed by your highness outside of Xinwu City, Spiderweb completely gave up on the idea of fanning the flames. Instead, they turned to investigate the plans of the greatest threat to Beimang, Luo Yang. However, Su Longxiang and the little girl behind your highness made things difficult for us. We are also very troubled. After these 2 fights, Beimang didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Right now, Luo Yang should have sensed that Spiderweb was going to deal with this. If Spiderweb retreated back to Beimang unscathed, Grandpa Li would be so worried that he would break many of his roots. As long as your highness is willing to watch from the side and watch the tigers fight, Morong Longshui will owe your highness a favor. How about it?" Su Fengyan said in surprise, "Isn't Yelu Dongchuang a relative of Beimang's imperial family? How did he get involved with Luo Yang? Broken Spear Deng Mao is an expert ranked even higher than Human Cat on the martial rankings. Why would he be a pawn for Luo Yang? Why don't you have the arrogance of a top expert?" Morong Longshui smiled bitterly. What your highness is asking is exactly what I wanted to know when I secretly infiltrated Liang. Su Fengyan narrowed his eyes and joked. Morong Longshui, our statuses are roughly the same. Look, when I went to Beimang, I killed 2 of the top 10 demons of the demonic path, as well as the mountain lord of Soldier Mountain. Aren't you envious? The tall and sturdy Morong Longshui smiled sweetly. You're a man, and I'm a woman. What's there to fight for? Sooner or later, I'll marry and become a wife. If you want to fight for your dignity, that's the duty of that stuffy Yelu Dongchuang. Su Fengyan smiled. Straightforward? I like it. Then you can leave. Don't forget, you owe me a favor. Morong Longshui smiled and asked, Really? Chapter 844. Su Fengyan waved his hand. Old Moth, who had been left aside for a long time, finally felt relieved. He really didn't want to fight with a reckless fake heavenly phenomenon. In Beimang, no one would give face to the king of Beiliang, Su Xiao. Old Moth was reluctant to admit that this white-haired young man was able to walk out alive and even bring 2 heads home. He was even more impressed that there were talents in Jianghu. Even if Beimang had Hong Jingyan, who had already achieved great things, Tuoba Chun-sun, who gradually became more courageous in the face of setbacks, and Princess Morong and Little Prince Yelu, he only knew the depth of Liang Jianghu's heritage when he arrived at Liang Jianghu. Chess and sword music school's real name was Sun Xiaopu. When Taiping Ling joked that Beimang's swordplay was like rice in a barren field, Sun Xiaopu changed his name to Huang Qing. However, when he arrived at Liang, swordplay talents were like worthless weeds that were cut down again and again. The people of Liang didn't care at all, but their neighbors Beimang trembled with fear. When one's fate was flourishing, the land and water were good. When the land and water were good, talents would emerge. This was the common sense that all the dynasties followed. The empress couldn't hold back anymore. She didn't want to let the Zhao family of Liang slowly grow, so that she could digest the power of the 8 kingdoms of spring and autumn. Unfortunately, man proposes, God disposes. The military god Tuoba was tricked by Luoyang in the Arctic tundra. Even Taiping Ling, who was already the empress's teacher, was caught off guard. The empress was furious, but within a year, tens of thousands of elite cavalry were still led by the nose by white-robe Luoyang and suffered heavy losses. In the end, she even fled to Liang. If Luoyang turned to the Zhao family of Liang, it would definitely make Beimang's morale drop to rock bottom after the Beiliang cavalry's surprise attack on the border. Morong Longshui turned around and left casually. Old Moth was more cautious and slowly retreated. Su Fengyan stared at Old Moth and laughed softly. I said that princess can leave, but I didn't say that you can leave. Last time, a large group of Beimang assassins from the Jianghu wanted to infiltrate the border and assassinate Beiliang officials. If I remember correctly, it was your Li Mibi who planned this. The 6 big and small leaders of the spider web personally took the lead. This debt needs to be settled clearly. Morong Longshui angrily turned around. Your Highness, isn't there no meaning in saying that? Su Fengyan said with a smile. Commandery Princess is sincere, but that old man Spiderweb is not very honest. He probably sent a secret message to Spiderweb. It is clear that he has not given up on his evil intentions. He wants to take advantage of the fact that I am alone to do something that he could not do in Great Peace City and Shinwu City. Su Fengyan flicked his sleeves, and 8 flying swords floated in front of him. Since you sent a wasp to send a message, then don't blame me for using my best sword tomb flying swords to kill butterflies and spiders. Morong Longshui and Old Moth looked at each other and retreated at the same time. At the same time, Su Fengyan did not hesitate to follow them. He kept a close distance and did not let the 2 escape. The little girl carrying the withered sunflower followed behind Su Fengyan without saying a word. In the distance, Morong Longshui imperceptibly slowed down his footsteps and secretly checked his qi. Su Fengyan suddenly sped up and the distance between them shortened from 400 feet to 300 feet. Morong Longshui, who originally wanted to use this to test whether Su Fengyan was strong on the outside but weak on the inside, sighed and began to retreat for real. She did not believe that Su Fengyan would let her go for a favor. There were only two possibilities why Su Fengyan did not immediately give chase after killing a section of the willow tree. The first possibility was that he did not have enough strength and was using all his strength to fight 1 against 3. His situation was not good. If that was the case, Murong Longshui did not mind severely injuring Su Fengyan in exchange for his life. The second possibility was that this treacherous prince, who was familiar with fighting to the death, was using his old trick again. He deliberately showed weakness again so that he could easily kill her and Old Moth, who were not weak. Old Moth could involve the hidden forces of Spiderweb, and Su Fengyan might be able to call for reinforcements. When the time came, the outcome would still be 50-50. Su Fengyan flew through the air to chase after the two. The young assassin he nicknamed Miss Hee followed behind him all the time. Su Fengyan wiped his face with his hand. His palm was full of blood. He hesitated for a moment and honestly said in a low voice, "That princess is very cunning. I have to puff myself up at my own cost. If it were not for her undying desire to kill me, I would have taken you and run away. I fought with Zhao Ningxin on the Spring God Lake, so I can't continue to let her instill her cultivation without any scruples. This is a good thing for me. The qi in my body is growing rapidly, but it is not beneficial to the current situation. It will only be a burden. In a day or two, no matter how fast my internal energy grows, it will not be able to reach the first level." Moreover, she was heavily injured in the battle with the human cat in Shinwu City. This time, killing a section of willow was more or less a bluff. If it were not for that section of willow foolishly running into us, we would have been exposed. But don't worry, they can't kill you. If they want to kill me, even if I stand still and let them kill me, it will still not be easy. It can be said that we are in an invincible position. The only difference is how much we earn from this transaction." The young girl snorted. Su Fengyan looked into the distance. "It would be best if we can capture that princess and the old man alive. Then I will make a big profit. Later we will sit down and split the loot. With our friendship, I promise I won't cheat you." The young lady kicked Su Fengyan's buttocks. The nimble and agile prince nimbly flipped through the air, continuing to steadily rush forward. She said with a light laugh, "Even if there are reinforcements hidden in the shadows, they wouldn't dare to rush over in such a reckless manner. Moreover, it's not like I don't have a backup plan. Let's just slowly play a game of cat and mouse with these two northern Mang great figures. I can also use this chance to nurture my strength through battle, recover my cultivation, solidify the realm I lost and then regained. You are good at finding the right time and place to attack, while Suing is good at capturing auras. Let's give them a good time." After an entire day of cat and mouse hunting, Murong Longshui and Old Moth were extremely sullen. Su Fengyan had always maintained a distance of half a li from them. When they rested, Su Fengyan would slowly stop and harass and provoke them from a certain distance. When they moved forward, Su Fengyan would continue to tail them. There were even 2 times when he took the initiative to intercept them. When the first attack failed, he would make a prompt decision to retreat. It wasn't that Murong Longshui didn't think of taking the initiative, but Su Fengyan didn't give her the chance at all. He was adept at chasing and killing, and when he escaped, he was even faster than anyone else. If there was a section of willow present, and both sides had a certain chance of winning, Murong Longshui and Old Moth wouldn't have been so passive. However, there weren't so many ifs in the world. In the night, Murong Longshui was washing his face by a stream in the depths of the wild forest. Su Fengyan was squatting on a large rock more than 100 feet away. He even had the leisure to worm his way into being friends with the Princess of Beimang, persuading her not to be a princess, but to find a scholarly man in Beiliang and marry him. This made her so angry that her teeth itched. At that time, Old Moth had wanted to take a detour and launch a sneak attack, but he was blocked by a red robe. 3 days later, the two sides entered a town one after another. Murong Longshui was still fine. With the support of his diamond body, his complexion was still good. However, Old Moth, who was on tenterhooks, couldn't help but look dispirited. Su Fengyan casually stole 2 mink hats of different sizes from the market. He put one on himself and pressed the other on the little girl's head. The furry mink hat covered her eyebrows and forehead. If the sunflower on her shoulder wasn't mentioned, She looked somewhat like an ordinary girl. Chapter 845. Murong Longshui had not had a drop of water for 3 days and 2 nights. Since he could not get rid of the pair of maggots behind him, he might as well choose a restaurant in the busy city. He took out an ingot of gold from the small pouch on his waist and tossed it to the waiter, telling him to keep the change. He ordered a table of sumptuous food and wine and sat down by the window. Whether it was his extravagant spending or her rare mountain-like figure, they were all very eye-catching. Murong Longshui did not see that bastard outside the window, so he was happy that he did not see and did not feel annoyed. He only cared about eating large pieces of meat. On the other hand, the spider moth chewed and swallowed slowly. A few diners nearby were whispering and commenting on Murong Longshui. They were not very polite and reserved in their words. The spider moth had accumulated quite a bit of anger in the past 3 days and wanted to quietly teach this group of rude people a lesson. Murong Longshui gently shook his head and drank a large mouthful of soju wine that he had never tasted before. He held it in his mouth and was not in a hurry to swallow it, slowly savoring the taste. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw an endless stream of people in the busy city. The small families were also wearing silk and satin. Murong Longshui was somewhat entranced. After the spring and autumn turmoil ended in Liang, the brocade and colored silk obtained from the western Shu, the southern Tang, the eastern Yu, and the other 3 places amounted to millions of bolts. These years, the Zhao family of Liang was much more lax in customizing the clothes of the common people compared to the previous dynasties. Murong Longshui swallowed the wine, pursed his lips, and softly murmured, "What a picture of peace and prosperity." Behind a green wall less than 5 feet away, there were only a few pedestrians. Su Fengyan, wearing a mink hat, was squatting at the corner of the wall, chewing a scallion pancake as he muttered vaguely. Without delay, he raised his sleeve, like a small squad leader pretending to be a soldier on the battlefield, giving orders to a few flying swords floating in front of him. With a flick of his finger, 3 of the swords flew along the wall and out of the alley. In an instant, they pierced through the window and pierced straight at Murong Longshui through the window. Old Moth's finger lightly tapped on the table, and wisps of white mist appeared between the flying swords and the princess. The 3 naughty flying swords were unable to succeed, so they turned back the way they came. As soon as the first wave left, the second wave came. This time, the 3 swords came at a tricky angle, and after piercing through the window, they quickly scattered. Old Moth immediately knocked on the table in a hurry. The 3 swords came and left in a hurry, but the third wave came in the blink of an eye, never tiring. This made Old Moth, who was focused on concealment, more and more tired of dealing with them. A few sharp-eyed drinkers saw the white mist by the window and vaguely bright fireflies. Murong Longshui put down his wine bowl heavily. He had just advised Old Moth not to make a big fuss when she suddenly stood up, smashed through the window, and ran away in big strides. Everybody in the restaurant was dumbstruck. Could it be that this woman was a Jianghu heroine who had hidden her strength? Su Fengyan, who was standing at the foot of the green wall, quickly put a small half of the scallion pancake in his mouth and ran away. Murong Longshui stood in the middle of the alley, his 5 fingers hooked into the wall, crushing the bricks in his palms. His face turned ashen. Old Moth was also annoyed by Su Fengyan's endless tricks, but he did not know how to comfort that young Junju. The reason why they didn't give chase was because this kid's flying sword technique was too accurate. Within 10 zhong, the flying swords hovered just right in front of them, quietly waiting for their prey. 8 flying swords, that was the starting point of 8 traps. Old Moth could not help muttering, "It's really chasing a dog that randomly shits. Wherever you go, you have to worry about your shoes being stained with dog poop. If you don't chase, he'll just bark a few times behind your butt. He's really hard to deal with." Murong Longshui was amused by this vulgar metaphor, and the haze in his heart dissipated. At the end of the alley, that guy seemed to have noticed that the 2 did not have the intention to pursue and fight. He appeared with a mischievous smile and leaned against the wall. After finishing the scallion pancake, he casually wiped his greasy fingers on his mink hat and kindly reminded them, "You 2 immortal couple still haven't made up your mind? when I call over thousands of Bailiang cavalry, each of them spit a mouthful of saliva to drown you. Be careful not to become a pair of dying mandarin ducks, swimming and swimming in their saliva. Morong Longshui stared fixedly at that bastard who was paddling and sneered, "Don't talk nonsense. Right now, Spiderweb and the Bailiang spies have become a thorn in Zhao Guo's side. No one dares to act rashly. If you can mobilize 1,000 cavalry from Bailiang here, I, Morong Longshui, will not only obediently allow myself to be captured, but I'll also be willing to be Su Fengyan's servant." Su Fengyan laughed loudly. "You said it yourself. If you have the ability, then just wait. Tide Listening Pavilion has a Taoist scripture that records the ability to cast beans into soldiers. Do you dare to give me 3 days? When I master this ability, you'll be my servant." What a coincidence, Wutongyan is lacking a sword servant. I see that you're tall and strong, but you have a strong aura. How about it? Morong Longshui gritted his teeth and squeezed out a smile. That's negotiable. Not to mention a sword. I'll even carry a spirit tablet for you in the future. Su Fengyan pretended to be angry and said, "Are you cursing me? Hey, silkworm-rearing old man, why don't you discipline your wife? How are you managing the household? Have you lived for so many years in vain? You said that I'm a dog sh*t. But when you're having sex with the princess, do you think it's romantic? I heard that you have a bad reputation in Spiderweb. The number of women you've defiled and killed can't be counted with 2 hands. This time, you're going to roam the Jianghu with the princess at the prime of her youth. Don't have any evil intentions. Living a good life is more important than anything else." Chapter 846. The still virgin Beimang Junju laughed it off, but Old Moth was somewhat anxious. Although Spiderweb had always been loyal to Her Majesty the Empress, or to be precise, to the Shadow Prime Minister behind Her Majesty, Li Mixi, Morong Longshui's status was particularly illustrious. If his master was humiliated, his servant would die. Moreover, His Royal Highness's mouth was full of nonsense, and he splashed dirty water on Beimang and the Junju together. If the Junju returned to Beimang someday and remembered this, how could Old Moth not be alarmed? Su Fengyan originally wanted to continue teasing the moth cocoon, but the arrival of the little girl made him restrain himself. Her furry mink hat was askew on her head. She squatted to the side and slowly nibbled on a scallion pancake with beef slices. Compared to Su Fengyan's scallion pancakes, it was clearly much more luxurious. The money for the scallion pancakes came from the money pouch that Su Fengyan had stolen from the streets. Jia Jia finished chewing the scallion pancake and licked his fingers. Then, as if he was not used to the warmth of the mink hat, he tugged on it. Old Moth saw this temporary partnership in his eyes and did not find it funny at all. Instead, he was afraid and troubled. For the past few days, only Su Fengyan had acted. Old Moth believed that when the little girl recovered from her injuries, her next hand chop would fall on him and the Junju. Old Moth rubbed his brandy nose and laughed sinisterly. "His Royal Highness, I heard that the consort of the King of Bailiang was originally a female sword immortal. Because she was pregnant with you, there was the white clothes case in the capital. She was left with an incurable disease and passed away early. I also heard that your eldest sister, Su Weisheng, married far away in Jiangnan and is depressed. Your second sister, Su Weisheng, is not much better. She almost died at the hands of Chen Jibao. In a few more years, the new king will replace the old one, and you'll finally become a vassal king with great difficulty. Be careful that in the end, you'll be all alone, unable to share your blessings with others. You still have to worry about the northern Mang's iron hooves coming south, while guarding against the Li Yang's obstructions. If I were you, I would have long gone mad. Not only is Beimang preparing for war by your bedside, there is also the Zhao family's son who bears a grudge, Zhang Julu, Gu Jiantang, and a large group of loyal officials watching coldly from the sidelines. There are also several vassal kings eyeing covetously. Tell me, aren't you suffering?" Su Fengyan was still leaning against the wall. He crossed his arms in front of his chest and sighed heavily. Exactly. Morong Longshui's words were shocking. His expression was calm as he said, "Zhao Guo has Beimang's men of sacrifice who are in a high position. He can be considered a big shot in the capital. Many people know that this is your last stay in Jianghu. The battle outside Shenwu City may not be the end of your Jianghu. If you continue to play cat and mouse with us, be careful that the Zhao family's son will take advantage of the situation. At that time, I definitely won't mind joining forces with Zhao Go to leave your corpse in Jianghu. In short, you and I are now in a gambling situation. We are betting on whether the Zhao family's son and the important officials of Liang have the courage to do so. If I lose, it will only maintain the current stalemate. If you lose, you, father, and Beimang have been holding back for more than 20 years, and it will all be for nothing. The reason why I am being so frank with you is because I have never treated you as an irreconcilable enemy. On the contrary, Su Fengyan, I admire you from the bottom of my heart. In Beimang, only Tuoba and Dongzhua can make me, Murong Longshui, accept wholeheartedly. Su Fengyan said carelessly. Accepting wholeheartedly doesn't count as accepting. Accepting a woman's body is truly accepting. Murong Longshui ignored his frivolous words and asked calmly, "Are you determined to gamble with me?" Su Fengyan stretched out his hand and shook it. He shook his head and laughed. "It's not a gamble. Just like how Beiliang only believes in cavalry and Beiliang's blade. I only believe in what I have earned." Murong Longshui's lips curled up as he laughed coldly. "Then let's wait and see." She turned around and left the alley. Old Moth was about to turn around when Su Fengyan laughed and said, 240 words. I've remembered them all. Old Moth's throat moved slightly as he spat out a mouthful of thick phlegm on the ground. He smiled mockingly at Su Fengyan and walked away. The young girl snorted. Su Fengyan didn't mind her teasing and asked curiously, "Where did your big cat go?" Jia squatted on the ground and didn't say anything. She had been silent for the past few days. No matter what Su Fengyan asked, she didn't respond. Su Fengyan squatted down and helped her adjust her mink hat. She glared at him and put her hand back. Su Fengyan rolled his eyes and stood up. The two of them continued to follow Flower-like Jade and Spirited Jade. These were the nicknames that Su Fengyan had given to Su Fengyan and Old Silkworm Cocoon the day before yesterday. In Su Fengyan's words, this was called repaying evil with good. They passed by a stall on the side of the road where an old scholar had set up a stall to sell old books. There was a piece of calligraphy placed vertically with the words, "Classical Fish" on it. It was pressed down by a green prawn copper paperweight. The old scholar saw Su Fengyan and the young girl pass by and asked with a smile, "Young master, aren't you looking for books? If you don't have enough money to buy books, old hairpins can be used as money." Su Fengyan stopped and bent down to look at the calligraphy. He asked, "Old mister, does the classical fish mean otter sacrificial fish?" The old scholar smiled and nodded. "That's right. Young master is indeed knowledgeable." Su Fengyan still lowered his head and continued to ask, "Ja. All homonyms are A, 3 A's, 3 A's, 3 A's, 3 A's, and 3 A's. The old scholar clicked his tongue and said, "Young master, are you talking about that Huang Longshu? This name is unlucky. It's better not to mention it." Su Fengyan looked at the expressionless little girl, and then looked at the old scholar who was pretending to be mysterious. He took out a hairpin and gently placed it next to the paperweight. "Old mister, take her away. No matter how unlucky it is, it's not as unlucky as being by my side." The old Confucian scholar reached out to pick up the hairpin, but the little girl slapped the back of his hand with the sunflower. His face was full of resentment. The old man smiled and said, "I didn't take your hairpin for nothing. There's an old fart called Lu Hao who left the capital with a lackey from the Dongyue sword pool. He can enter the city in less than an hour." Su Fengyan nodded and asked, "How is Suacia Valley?" The old man actually told him everything he knew. They're still waiting. The two old men whose ages added together are more than 200 years old are staring at each other like tortoises staring at mung beans, slowly wasting time. But in my opinion, no matter how strong his sword is, it's still not enough. What else do you want to ask? Ask them together. Zhao Huang Chao, the cowardly turtle? Lu Songtao, who's suffering from qi deviation? Or Dong Tai, who rides a donkey to see the mountains and rivers? Or Luo Yang, who helps people find deer? Su Fengyan hesitated for a moment and said with a smile, Forget it. You two should pack up and leave as soon as possible. The old man smiled playfully and said, You're really not afraid of death? Su Fengyan said helplessly, Once you leave, I'll quickly run away. The old man laughed loudly. That's true. He stood up and withdrew his smile. He gently picked up the paperweight and placed it under his armpit. He shook the calligraphy and glanced sideways at Su Fengyan. She took the fate of Mount Longhu's Zhao Xuansu for you. Whoever started the trouble should end it. You brat, hurry up and restore the Great Yellow Court. Otherwise, if she dies in 3 years, I'll make you and Bailiang suffer even if I break the rules and go against my will. Of course, you can't die today. Even if you do, you can only die in 3 years. That's why I called for a helper. The little girl didn't drag her feet at all and didn't even look back. The old man walking side by side sighed, How heartless. Don't ask for the hairpin back. The little girl sniffled. The old man suddenly laughed. The mink hat is not bad. It looks festive. The little girl pulled down the furry mink hat that covered her forehead and covered her entire face. Su Fengyan stood where he was and quietly watched the two leave. Before long, he turned his head and saw the white-clothed Luo Yang slowly walking over from the opposite end of the street. Chapter 847. Chapter 2 is after 11 o'clock. P.S. Every day, a hero will be selected on WeChat's public platform and a physical book with a signature in the snow will be given out. It's easy to add a friend. There's a QR code on the page of the book in the snow, or you can search for Fenghua 1985. Su Fengyan pointed at the green-robed swordsman who was leading a horse on the street and smiled. If I'm not wrong, that should be Song Nianqing from the Dongyue sword pool. Luo Yang said calmly. So what? Su Fengyan was afraid that she would not take it seriously and look down on the heroes of Jianghu, so he patiently explained with a smile. This guy is not a fame-seeking swordsman. His Shen Finger realm in swordsmanship is much more solid than the Taoist priest's Shen Finger realm. He's one of the few grandmasters of swordsmanship in Liang. Moreover, Song Nianqing's skills are in harmony and he's proficient in the 3 doctrines. He's not a brute who only knows how to use brute force, so he'll be hard to deal with. Not counting the sneaky sparring, after Song Nianqing became the head of the sword pool at a young age. He's known to have fought 19 times in the past 60 years. Every time he would change his sword and move. One time he brought 12 swords to compete with Wang Xianji in the martial emperor city. Of course, he didn't win, but it was said that the fight was very grand. In the current Jianghu, Wang Xiaoping of Wudong, Qi Xianxia of Longhu Mountain, and Wu Luding of Wu family are all slightly inferior to him. Don't take it lightly. This time he brought 14 swords in one go. It's obvious that he's going to risk his life. After losing to Wang Xianji, he's been in seclusion for years. His realm must have improved a lot. You should pay more attention to him. Don't treat him like a cat or a dog. However, Luo Yang's words made Su Fengyan choke. Can he be compared to Dong Tai? Su Fengyan's eyes and ears were very clear. He didn't know why he didn't notice Lu Haosher's presence. Could it be that this old dog from the Zhao family thought that Song Nianqing alone was enough to kill him? The sword mound of the Wu family and the Dongyue sword pool had never been regarded as factions of the martial arts world. Aside from the fact that few people from both sides traveled to Jianghu, the other reason was that these 2 giant trees of the sword forest were simply too tall. Even a sect like the Snowy Manor, which was second to none in the province, could only bow its head before these 2 behemoths. After the sword mound of the Wu family defeated 10,000 riders with 9 swords, it declined from its peak. The Dongyue sword pool had always wanted to suppress the Wu family, which was known to be the best swordsman in the world. They even took the initiative to flirt with the Liang imperial court. Li Yibai, the leader of the younger generation of the sword pool, appeared at the Snowy Manor with 18 sword maids to promote the Wild Goose Castle. Su Fengyan didn't have a good impression of the sword pool, but he treated Li Yibai quite well. When he first traveled the Jianghu, he saw an honest man from afar. His moves were simple and not flashy. At that time, Su Fengyan didn't think that it was a high-level swordsmanship. He only thought that this man was good and didn't put on airs. Later, he found out that he was a talented swordsman who had the potential to become the leader of the sword pool. Therefore, when he attacked the Snowy Manor, He only found trouble with the Spring Invitation Cottage and the Wild Goose Castle. Li Yibai's master, the current leader of the Dongyue sword pool, Song Nianqing, left the sword pool for the first time in nearly 30 years. He took 14 famous swords with him. It seemed that he wouldn't stop until he took Su Fengnian's head. Su Fengnian asked softly, "Why don't you wait for a while and let me test his strength?" Luoyang sneered and said, "Are you afraid that I will easily kill Song Nianqing and alert the enemy? And Lu Haoshe will become a coward and ruin your plan of being the Oriole behind? I find it strange. With your current skills, fighting Master Lu Hao is like hitting a rock with an egg. What? Do you want me to help you when you are beaten half to death? Let me say this first. Even if I help you, it will be after Master Lu Hao kills you, and then I will help you collect your corpse." Su Fengnian grinned and smiled brightly. "I'm not that particular. I just feel that since there is going to be a fight, there is no reason for me to hide in the back." Luo Yang clicked her tongue and said, "I remember now. Outside Dunhuang, someone defended the city gate with a sword and blocked hundreds of cavalry. Then he swaggered into the city. How impressive." Su Fengnian said shamelessly, "A real man doesn't talk about his past glory. Why are you talking about this?" Outside the window, groups of armored cavalry appeared on the street. Without any explanation, they drove the people out of the city. At first, there were some rich noblemen and scholars who cursed and swore. In the end, they were smashed to the ground by the end of their iron spears and dragged away like dead dogs. Many of the common people who stayed in their homes were also unable to escape. In the bitter cold winter, they were driven out of the city gate in groups. Some of the members of the big families in the neighborhood were also not lucky enough to escape. After the confluence, they wanted to gang up and cause trouble. But when they saw that the old masters of the government and county yamen were also in the group of refugees, they did not have the courage to cause trouble. Not long after, the area around the restaurant was almost empty. The diners of the restaurant had already run out. The shopkeeper did not care about the money owed by the group of ruffians and hurriedly left with his family. Some ruffians wanted to fish in troubled waters. While the people in the city were empty, they went to the rich people's houses to steal some antiques and valuables. As a result, the patrolling cavalry from outside the city saw them and killed them on the spot. A few ruffians with nimble legs saw that the situation was not good and tried to escape by jumping over the wall. They were directly shot by arrows and turned into hedgehogs. For a moment, the people were even more anxious. They did not know what had happened. They all thought that there was going to be a war again. The old people who had experienced the war of the spring and autumn period were frightened and cried. The women and children who came with their ancestors were also crying. The people on the street scattered. The old man in green with a pile of swords on the back of his horse was very eye-catching. When Su Fengnian stood up and looked at the street, the old man also looked up. After their eyes met, Song Nianqing did things quickly. Without saying anything, he let go of the reins and took a long sword from the horse's back. He gently drew a half arc in the direction of the second floor of the restaurant. Chapter 848. Su Fengnian had jumped up high the moment Song Nianqing made his first move. He held the beam of the room with one hand. Luo Yang, who was sitting on the chair, was much more elegant than him. She didn't move at all. That crescent-shaped sword aura sliced through the outer wall of the restaurant like cutting tofu and went straight for Luo Yang. Luo Yang gently pushed that colored glaze cup with one finger. It slid forward an inch on the table. The person, the table, and the chair were like a fish cutting through the ripples, forcing the sharp sword aura to slide to the sides. This sword aura cut through the back wall of the restaurant and pierced through the clouds for more than 30 meters before it slowly dissipated. Half of the restaurant slid down at an angle. Some tiles and broken wood bounced off several meters away from Luo Yang. Su Fengnian naturally wouldn't fall with the collapsed restaurant. He let go of the beam and landed beside Luo Yang. He glanced at this woman who made him speechless and didn't know what to say. Su Fengnian could take Song Nianqing's probing sword attack head-on. Of course, it wouldn't be as easy for him as it was for Luo Yang. Moreover, Song Nianqing's first move was more of a greeting than a fight. It had the flavor of the sword pool welcoming guests with peaceful means before resorting to force. After reaching the finger-profound realm, His control of qi was much better than that of the Vajra realm. Luo Yang played her flute beside the spring god lake. She could sense the level of everyone's realm through the flute's sound. It was this trick. Only Luo Yang dared to take Song Nianqing's sword attack head-on. After Song Nianqing's first move, as long as the opponent took it head-on, he wouldn't be able to accurately deduce the opponent's realm. Instead, he would be able to roughly know the opponent's realm. Then, the second and third sword attacks wouldn't be inferior to the opponent's, which would be more beneficial to his sword heart illumination. The restaurant became like a simple tavern without any shelter, revealing the man and woman on the second floor. Song Nianqing was just like the rumors. He immediately sheathed his sword and placed one hand on the other scabbard. He asked loudly, "This old man is Song Nianqing of the sword pool of Dongyue. May I ask who is upstairs?" The person the old grandmaster asked seriously was naturally not His Royal Highness, who the world knew. In the Jianghu, regardless of whether it was an expert or a novice, most people had the habit of asking about the details of their opponents. What their nicknames were, who their masters were, and what their backgrounds were. This wasn't an unnecessary move. Apart from those nobodies who liked to give themselves famous nicknames that could be ignored, the rest of the people in the Jianghu were quite rare to have nicknames that weren't vulgar. They all relied on their abilities and gold and silver to earn their nicknames. Everyone in the Jianghu was in the same profession. Whether it was to make a living or to make a living, being kind to others wasn't a wrong thing to do. When faced with people who had been famous for a long time, most people didn't want to offend them to the point of death. Therefore, many people in the Jianghu who didn't know when to back down would often be able to turn hostility into friendship after a word of disagreement. In fact, they didn't even fight, but they still glorified it as no discord, no concord. Those who were popular in the Jianghu were definitely old foxes who were good at making friends from both sides. Even if the hotheads had good cultivation, they didn't understand the principle of not looking at the monk's face and would often suffer many unnecessary losses. Many Jianghu people who had a bright future were stubborn. They didn't know when to advance or retreat after provoking rich and powerful enemies. And in the end, they didn't even know how they died. Song Nianqing, who was one of the top swordsmen in the world's sword forest, was no exception. That young woman in white really shocked him. Since when did Li Yang have such a woman who hid her strength so well? Su Fengyan coldly snorted and said, "She's my friend. What's wrong?" Luo Yang glanced at Su Fengyan from the corner of her eyes. How could she not know this guy's little scheme? If she bluntly revealed her identity, she was afraid that no matter how conceited Song Nianqing was, he would have to think twice. Then this guy's wishful thinking might not be successful. Su Fengyan was still singing a one-man show. Surnamed Song, if you have the ability, then try to climb the tower. Don't try to worm your way into being friends with us. In the past, you carried 12 swords to Wu City, but didn't you come back empty-handed? So what if you have 2 more swords today? If you have the ability, then use all 14 swords. I'll say it right here, we'll take all of them. Luo Yang calmly asked, "Aren't you bored? Aren't you ashamed?" Su Fengyan turned his head and laughed in a low voice. "It's not easy to get the thigh of the number 1 person of the evil path. Let me show it off." Su Fengyan's frivolous words didn't anger Song Nianqing. His state of mind was as calm as an ancient well, and he didn't respond to Su Fengyan. He just lightly patted the scabbard. This time, he didn't hold the sword in his hand, but instead rode it 20 feet away from his hand. The sword's aura was much stronger than the first sword. The tip of the sword was slightly raised, and it swept towards Su Fengyan on the second floor. Luo Yang stood up. She obviously wasn't in the mood to wait for the dozen or so swords. She jumped down from the restaurant and brushed past the flying sword. Then she held the hilt with one hand. The long sword vibrated incessantly, and the sound could be heard all over the city. Song Nianqing grasped the third sword hanging on the horse's back. He didn't panic because Luo Yang had caught his unsheathed sword. Instead, he smiled knowingly. This sword was called Hoary Head. People of the world couldn't escape the fate of separation when they turned white. When the sword and the sword's aura were unsheathed, they were separated. Breaking one of them wouldn't affect the overall situation. Song Nianqing's second sword was originally pointed at Su Fengyan, but the sword's aura was drawn towards the beautiful and valiant woman in white. Moreover, the white sword didn't differentiate between the two. As long as Su Fengnian hastily attacked, any impact and qi he exerted on the long sword could be transferred to the sword's aura. This was the essence of the hoary head sword. If one was the first to sense the sword's aura and block it, the same principle would apply. Luo Yang suddenly clenched her 5 fingers, and the long sword in her hand suddenly stopped wailing. The perfect sword embryo was broken, but her means were swift and fierce. It was tantamount to adding fuel to the fire for the sword's aura lurking in the dark. Su Fengnian didn't realize the mystery until the sword's aura suddenly approached. He cursed. It wasn't clear whether he was cursing Song Nianqing for being treacherous or blaming Luo Yang for deliberately tricking him. 8 flying swords came out of her sleeve like a thunder pool. The woman who tricked Su Fengnian secretly raised the corner of her mouth. She held the long sword that had completely lost its spirit upside down, landed lightly on the ground, and ran towards Song Nianqing. The sword's aura in her hand soared to more than 10 feet. It was as thick as the mouth of a bull and like the tail of a comet. It was domineering. Song Nianqing was shocked. He was only holding the sword in his right hand, but he immediately added a sword to his hand. Luo Yang, who was holding the long sword upside down, released the hilt and threw the long sword and the sword's aura at Song Nianqing. In fact, it was more like a smash. Chapter 849. The sword and sword qi were like a painter splashing ink onto the ground. The sword qi was so strong that before Song Nianqing's second sword could get close, it had already been crushed into powder. Song Nianqing did not retreat but advanced instead. His feet were only a few inches off the ground, and he advanced more than 10 feet. When he stopped, he twisted his toes, and the new pair of plain green cloth shoes slid on the ground, kicking up a cloud of dirt. His left hand held the sword behind his back, and his right hand held the sword in front of his chest. He then pointed downwards, and the tip of the sword went from downwards to upwards, pressing against the bottom of the sword qi. The sword in Song Nianqing's hand gradually bent, and bit by bit, he changed into the collapsing sword style. The tip of the sword was not higher than his head, and with a light shout, he actually flicked the condensed sword force over his head, landing on the street and creating a bottomless pit. The sword pool sect master's sword did not straighten, and maintained a slightly bent collapsing sword style. He let go of the sword, and before the sword fell, the tip of his left hand collided with the middle of the sword that was hovering in the air. There was a clang, like the sudden sound of a temple's morning bell, melodious and loud. Luo Yang moved forward at a moderate pace, and with a casual wave of her arm, she blocked the sword qi that came from the collision of the swords. Song Nianqing quickly changed from a straight collision to a horizontal one, and the second sound was like the evening drum, extremely dull. Striking the morning bell, striking the night drum, the sound of the drum kills, the bell absorbs the soul. Song Nianqing had secretly entered the Jianghu 20 years ago, and when he was traveling, he stayed in a nameless ancient temple and learned it after hearing the morning bell and evening drum. Song Nianqing repeated the boring collision without stopping, and in an instant he had struck it 108 times. Luo Yang continued to move forward, and in the end, she was even stingy with raising her hand. There were continuous explosions in front of her, and everywhere she passed, the sound of the bell, drum, and sword would destroy everything. The original meaning was to sound the drum and listen to the sound, and to return quickly and not violate the rules. But since Luo Yang could kill her way through Beimang alone twice, what was a small noise of the bell, drum, and sword qi? Song Nianqing's 2 swords finally couldn't withstand the force of the collision. The 2 swords broke and fell to the ground. Song Nianqing didn't turn back to retrieve the swords from the horse's back. Instead, he formed a sword seal that resembled both Buddha and Tao. Riding the swords out of their sheaths, the 3 swords left their sheaths one after the other, leaped up from the horseback, like a long rainbow falling on top of Luo Yang's head. Song Nianqing's hair and beard stood on end. His green robe fluttered violently, and his feet sank a foot into the ground. Luo Yang was simply arrogant to the point of being unreasonable. With her hands behind her back, she stomped on the ground, shattering the bluestone slabs and sending the gravel flying. It was exactly the same as the first battle with Dong Tai in Dunhuang City. However, at that time, she stomped on the ground, shaking up thousands of raindrops to form 1,000 white swords. Every time a sword pierced towards her, it would be deflected by a stone a few feet away. In the 30 steps that Luo Yang had taken, the 3 swords had already returned without any results more than 60 times. The tips of the swords had long been broken, and the distance between her and Song Nianqing had shortened to less than 10 feet. Song Nianqing pressed his hands down, and the 3 swords that were half of their original length pierced towards Luo Yang at the same time, making a final struggle. Luo Yang brushed her hand and casually grasped the 3 flying swords that were like arrows at the end of their flight. She continued to move forward slowly. However, unlike the first sword that was crushed by her on the spot, the 3 swords didn't lose their vitality in her hand. Instead, the sword chi grew like bamboo shoots after the rain, thriving and thriving. Luo Yang looked down as she walked slowly. Even though she sensed the scene of a snake devouring an elephant in her hand, she didn't have any response. The sword chi of the 3 swords took root in her palm. Song Nianqing squinted his eyes and snapped his fingers. That old horse was familiar with its owner's habits. It trod lightly on its hooves and came to the side of the elderly man. Song Nianqing took out the only sword with a sword tassel among the 14 swords. The sword's body was as clear as a mirror, which was why it was named Zhao Dan. Back when he ascended Marshal the Arch City with the 12 swords, Song Nianqing was just a rookie of the sword forest that had just entered the pugilistic world. Wang Xianji was already recognized as the world's #1. However, when did Song Nianqing take a step back? The Zhao Dan in his hand was the first sword that Song Nianqing had personally forged after going into seclusion. Every swordsman was a swordsmith. They had to forge their own swords in the sword furnace. Although the sword pool had millions of swords, they were only used to remember the ancestors. Ever since Song Nianqing, the sword pool didn't allow any of the sex juniors to revere the past and belittle the present. This was why many visitors to the sword Dao all sighed that the sword pool no longer has any ancient swords. With the Zhao Dan in his hand, Song Nianqing's heroic spirit was overflowing. His sword heart was even clearer. The white-clothed woman walked forward step by step. It seemed like she didn't take the initiative to make a move. She was forced by the situation. However, Song Nianqing wasn't relaxed. She didn't stop at each step. The more leisurely she walked, the greater the disturbance it caused to Song Nianqing's mental state. Song Nianqing didn't take any other swords and only took the Zhao Dan. Wasn't this a sign that he valued that woman? Chapter 850. While Song Nianqing was accumulating his power, he looked at the woman of unknown origin. The previous 3 swords were named Time, Place, and People. They were specially designed to deal with Xian Qi and even celestial state masters. They could forcibly absorb Qi and become stronger when faced with a strong opponent. Every time Song Nianqing comprehended a move, he would forge a new sword. He had been diligent in forging and nurturing swords all these years. He had poured a lot of effort into each of the 14 swords, complemented by original sword moves. They were all worthy of being called new swords. They were truly unprecedented. If an opponent of the same state underestimated him, he would definitely suffer a great loss. Song Nianqing had originally hoped to nurture 20 swords in his life and leave the final battle to Dong Tai or Wang Xianji. However, he could not disobey the emperor's order. He had to break out of seclusion and wander the Jianghu in a green robe with swords. However, he did not think that the crown prince of Beiliang could bear the 14 swords. Song Nianqing suddenly widened his eyes. Time, place, and people. What's the harm in giving them all to you? The woman in white sneered. Her qi poured into the 3 swords like a flood. The purple, yellow, and white sword qi, as thick as an arm, circled wildly in her palms. The 3 swords suddenly cried out. It was a happy thing for a hungry man to eat his fill. However, if he died from eating too much, it would be a tragedy. The 3 shockingly chaotic sword qis instantly vanished into thin air. Song Nianqing exclaimed, "What a celestial state! Good, good, good!" The 2 were only 70 or 80 feet apart. Instead of being angry, the sword pool sect master smiled. He closed his eyes and gently touched the sword of courage in front of his chest with 2 fingers. He muttered to himself, "Old brother, the 7 swords who walked in front of you didn't die in vain." Luo Yang clapped her hands and laughed. "Dongyue's sword pool has hundreds of years of history, and this is all you've got?" Song Nianqing did not open his eyes. He smiled and said, "Watch me carry the lamp to see the world." The old man in a green robe handed out his sword. The next scene was not shocking. In the eyes of outsiders, it would only be funny. It was like a child who had just started to practice swordsmanship. He could barely lift the heavy sword in his hand and staggered around. His steps were messy and the momentum of his sword was distorted. Although his figure and sword moves were chaotic, his speed was extremely fast. In the blink of an eye, the distance of 70 to 80 feet had been reduced to a distance of 2 sword moves. When people practice swordsmanship, their seniors and great teachers would always advise them not to be controlled by the sword. That kind of swordsmanship would never amount to anything. Song Nianqing, who could be counted as one of the few great grandmasters in the way of the sword, did the opposite. He moved with his sword. There was no majestic sword aura that surged like a bull, nor was there a vast and righteous sword will. Just like that, he arrived in front of Luo Yang. Luo Yang frowned and shot out a palm. Under the influence of the sword of Zhao Dan, Song Nianqing actually dodged Luo Yang's palm. The tip of his sword was aimed at her shoulder. For the first time, Luo Yang left the central axis of the street. She took a step sideways and pinched the tip of the sword of Zhao Dan with 2 fingers. Before Luo Yang could exert her strength, the tip of the sword twisted. Song Nianqing's body spun and a splendid sword flower blossomed. Luo Yang flicked her finger. Song Nianqing withdrew his sword and turned half a circle to attack Luo Yang's back. This time, Luo Yang did not attack. Her feet did not move and her body fell backward. The sword had clearly missed, but the sword chi exploded like a firecracker where Luo Yang fell. Luo Yang's feet were still on the ground, but she turned her body to the left and barely dodged the sword chi. However, Song Nianqing did not show mercy. His long sword continued to entangle endlessly. For a moment, the sword chi around the 2 of them was like a cloud. It was too much for the eyes to take in. Luo Yang finally took a step forward. The sword chi of Zhao Dan in Song Nianqing's hand also began to show its magnificence. The ground of the street and the buildings on both sides of the street were smashed into pieces. Dust rose everywhere. Luo Yang walked and stopped, allowing the majestic sword chi to wreak havoc. She smiled and said, "It seems to be traceless, but in fact, it follows the winding of the world's dragon veins. It can be said that I have touched the threshold of the celestial state." The 2 of them resumed Luo Yang's position in the south of the northern Song dynasty. The demoness in white who disturbed the Jianghu of Beimang and Liang held the sword to her neck tightly. Song Nianqing suddenly opened his eyes and shouted angrily. He took a step forward and pushed the tip of the sword 3 feet forward. Luo Yang calmly took a small step back. The tip of the sword was less than 2 feet away from her neck. The abundant upstanding chi that came out of the sword messed up 2 strands of hair on her temples. Her sleeves fluttered as she held the sword. Luo Yang, who was not flustered at all, ignored the blood flowing from her palm. She looked straight at Song Nianqing and said with a smile, "Where did you get so many celestial state fingers? Get out." Luo Yang held the sword edge tightly and pushed it back. Song Nianqing, who refused to give up the sword, was hit in the heart by the sword hilt. Luo Yang seemed to be angry at his indiscretion and kicked the old man in green in the chest. The cloth shoes were worn thin by the ground. Song Nianqing, whose feet were off the ground, was almost at the same level with the sword. He pushed the tip of the sword 2 feet away from the woman in white's neck. "I gave you an inch and you wanted a mile." Luo Yang actually moved the tip of the sword 1 foot closer to her neck. She sneered and then slapped down with her palm. She directly broke the long sword with her palm. Since the sword was broken, Song Nianqing had to retreat. Luo Yang did not bother to beat a drowning dog. She casually threw away the broken sword and let Song Nianqing rush back to the old horse with the sword. Song Nianqing was hit in the heart by the sword hilt and kicked. Blood oozed from the corner of his mouth. He tried to calm down. The old man's face was full of disbelief. If he was fighting against Wang Xianji, the number one in the world, he would be in such a sorry state. But how could an unknown young woman in Jianghu be so domineering? Or was it because he was too ignorant? What the woman in white said next really made Song Nianqing flustered and exasperated. As an old man who occupied a place in the sword world, no matter how good he was at maintaining his composure, he could not stay calm. "I'll teach you how to use the sword." Chapter 851. On the second floor of the restaurant, Luoyang added fuel to the fire of the sword qi that was connected to the sword. The sword qi instantly surged, startling Su Fengnian. He hurriedly manipulated the 8 swords to form a lightning pool to defend himself. The sword qi and the sword qi seemed to be fighting against each other. The sword qi struck the flying swords, producing incessant tinkling sounds. Su Fengnian's actions were also unexpected. He was not in a hurry to destroy the sword qi. Instead, he fought and retreated. He moved around on the second floor, chipping away at the sword qi bit by bit until the sword qi was completely eliminated. After that, Luoyang went downstairs and pressed on. Song Nianqing could not care less about the person upstairs. The 2 swords of Morning Bell and Evening Drum, followed by the 3 swords of Favorable Timing, Favorable Location, and Favorable Person, followed by the sword Illuminating Courage, totaling 8 swords. They were all worthy of being called new swords, especially the 3 swords that stole the celestial phenomenon realm and the sword Illuminating Courage that followed. They were all eye-opening to Su Fengnian. Putting aside the unconventional flying swordsmanship, Su Fengnian's swordsmanship could barely be considered to have reached a higher level. However, he had a good eye. Song Nianqing of the sword pool handed over sword after sword according to the prescribed order. Even though Su Fengnian had been carefully guarding against Master Lu Hao, who was hiding in the shadows, he did not dare to take his eyes off of it. Looking at swords was like admiring calligraphy. A layman might only think that the calligraphy was written with dragon and snake strokes, but if it was him holding the brush, he would not be able to grasp the essence of calligraphy. This was why most people in Jianghu wanted to be guided by a master. Su Fengnian was like a spectator who often watched calligraphy. Some of the calligraphy that entered his eyes were graceful and charming. Some were clear and vigorous. Some had a solemn atmosphere. However, they all happened to be pleasing to him. Su Fengnian had an arrogant thought that no one knew about. He hoped that one day he could forge a furnace and form a sword altar and a large peak. There were not many trees on the peak, but they must all reach the sky. Su Fengnian glanced at old Ma, who was carrying a sword on his back on the street. He wondered if Song Nianqing's remaining 6 moves could cross Xianji and reach celestial phenomenon. If he stayed at Xianji, it would be impossible for him to hurt Luoyang. Luoyang was not a member of the 3 sections. She was a real martial artist. Like Wang Xianji, she was extremely domineering. She had fought Tuoba Bodhisattva, Deng Tea, and Hong Jingyan, who were the top 5 experts in the new martial arts ranking. She had even pulled Hong Jingyan down from the 4th position and replaced him. Against such a flawless demoness, even Celestial Phenomenon Sword would not have a 50% chance of winning, let alone Xianji. After a short moment of anger, Song Nianqing sighed and said, "This old man has poor eyesight and has been in seclusion all year round. I didn't expect to become a frog at the bottom of the well. Only now did I remember that there was a woman in white blocking useless monk by the green crossing river. I finally guessed your identity. I don't know if it's too late." Luoyang said she wanted to teach Song Nianqing a sword, but she did not take out a sword from anywhere. She also did not use any external object to make a sword. She just put her left hand across her chest with her palm facing up and her right hand slowly pressed down. Song Nianqing, who was standing beside the horse, looked up at the gray sky. He wiped the 6 swords hanging on the horse's back. The swords were not out of their sheaths. 3 swords pointed to the ground while the other 3 hung in the air. They fell randomly in all directions, looking messy. Song Nianqing muttered to himself, "This old man has been holding a sword all his life. He only saw it as a troublesome matter to pass on the incense. He was afraid that it would delay the progress of his swordsmanship. 40 years ago, he had a hint of enlightenment and almost achieved the sword of celestial sword. 20 years ago, by chance, I was watching the sea of clouds rise and fall in a blessed place. A red sun rose from the east, as if it had suddenly jumped into the world. I was touched again, but I still gave up on that sword. Since then, he went into seclusion. He only wanted to progress step by step. He wanted to enter celestial phenomenon before becoming a celestial immortal. Gradually, he learned that this old man was born in the sword pool. The first sword he chose was a peerless sword. The first sword manual he received was a top-notch secret manual. The first time he cultivated his inner strength was also a peerless heart mantra. The master who taught me swordsmanship was a grandmaster of swordsmanship. Everything went smoothly for him, but his swordsmanship cultivation was left far behind by some people who came from the countryside. Only then did he know that everything would cry out when there was injustice. This old man did not have any injustice in his heart, so how could he resonate with heaven and earth? Luo Yang did not care about Song Nianqing's enlightenment, nor did she care about the 6 swords standing between heaven and earth. Her palms seemed to be pressed together, but there was still a gap. A vision of heaven and earth. Su Fengyan sucked in a breath of cold air. The highest point in the city was the bell tower of a Taoist temple. The sharp eaves of the tower seemed to be pressed down by an invisible celestial being and snapped. Immediately after, the bell tower collapsed in an unusually smooth manner. The 1,000-year-old tower in the city, second only to the bell tower of the Taoist temple, also began to collapse. All the taller buildings in the city began to collapse together, showing a scene of being cut down by a knife. The huge city was like a piece of tofu on a chopping board, easily cut by a knife. The more it was cut, the thinner it became. In the blink of an eye, Su Fengyan did not dare to stay on the 2nd floor. He floated to the ground, only to hear the ear-piercing noise of thousands of kilograms of gravity-crushing wood and stone. Su Fengyan gently stamped his foot and then laughed bitterly. Not only was the heavens moving down, but the ground was also restless. It was like a great Buddha overlooking heaven and earth with its palms pressed together. There was nowhere to hide. Heaven and earth were in harmony, leaving only a line. This line was Luo Yang's sword. Song Nianqing's expression was grave. The 3 swords in the air pierced upwards, while the 3 swords on the ground penetrated downwards. Clearly, he was doing his best to assume a mighty posture of indomitable spirit. This line between heaven and earth was still 3 zhang high. Needless to say, the high walls of the city had long been completely destroyed. The elite cavalry that had been transferred from outside the city to clear out the city had really hit the mark by a stroke of luck. If not for their foresight, under the might of Luo Yang's mighty sword, the nearly 10,000 corpses would have been nailed to the ground. The more the situation was settled, the more Su Fengyan did not forget that Lu Haosher, Murong Longshui, and Spider Webmoth were still hidden in the city. Murong Longshui and the old man were indeed in the city, and they were not far from here. They were 3 streets away. Murong Longshui was sitting on the wall of a low alley. He had gotten a pot of wine from somewhere and was sitting cross-legged on it. He used his robe to wrap it up and eat. Old Moth stood in the middle of the alley and did the same action as Su Fengyan. He stomped hard and the entire alley's bluestone slabs cracked. The old man sighed and said, "Who would have thought that after the battle between Luoyang and Bodhisattva Tuoba in the icy plains of the extreme north, his methods had become even more vicious. Princess, with her here, do we still have to interfere? I'm just afraid of pulling chestnuts out of the fire. Before we can eat the roasted chestnuts, we'll get into trouble instead." Murong Longshui bent his finger and flicked a few peanuts, one near and one far. He watched them explode and said, "This immortal's method of controlling heaven and earth is the same as borrowing a sword from the Great Snow Plateau. After all, it's not invulnerable. Sword, immortal swords are invincible. You and I are destined to be discovered, but it's not impossible to fight for a chance of survival. Right now, I'm just afraid that the guard dog of the Zhao family in Great Peace City will act shamelessly and insist on waiting for Luo Yang to deal with us before making a move. But then it'll be even harder for him to kill Su Fengyan. It'll depend on Lu Haosher's decision. Presumably, Su Fengyan's head should be worth more than the 2 of us combined. Besides, I heard that this old man has a personal grudge with the Bailiang. In short, let's watch from afar. Luo Yang's temperament is unpredictable. If we annoy her, I don't want to die in Liang. Murong Longshui landed softly in the alley. Old Moth had already left quickly. The tall and strong Junju glanced at Old Moth's hurried back and smiled. On the street, Song Nianqing's 3 swords in the air started to fall. The 3 swords in the ground started to rise. All 6 swords trembled and wavered. Song Nianqing closed his eyes and focused. A person had 7 orifices. Every time a sword broke, the sword master, Song Nianqing, would bleed from one orifice. When all 6 swords were broken, Song Nianqing's eyes, ears, and arms were bleeding profusely. The miserable state of this great swordsman was truly frightening. But Song Nianqing's expression was still calm. Since only 6 of his 7 orifices were bleeding, it meant that other than the 14 swords on horseback on the surface, the number 1 of the sword pool, Song Nianqing, most likely had another sword hidden. When Song Nianqing finally spoke and attacked, Su Fengyan, who was most likely leaving behind his last words, had only guessed half right. The Junju and Old Moth were in the city, but Lu Haosher was not hiding in the city. 10 li away from the city, an old man with an old-fashioned face stood where he was. When Luo Yang's hands began to close the sky and the earth, he began to move his feet extremely slowly. The first step was not even half of an ordinary person's step. The second step was slightly faster, no different from an ordinary person's. The third step was the distance of an ordinary person's 2 steps, and so on and so forth. The sky and the earth were like thunder, rushing towards the city. Chapter 852. Xinjiafang was one of the best villas in Tianyuan. It had many people, deep mountains and remote rivers, and cultivated diligently while avoiding war. This feng shui was extraordinary. An old man and a young girl walked through the fields. It was cold and frosty, but the fields were not soft. There were some shriveled eggplants on the fields. The old man bent down to pick a few and put them in his pocket. The young girl behind him wore a cheap mink hat and looked back from time to time. The old man was still talking to himself. Don't look at the eggplants now. After being frosted, they are sweet when they enter the mouth. The taste is no worse than the crucian carp in winter and can compete with the winter bamboo shoots. Later, find a family and I will personally cook a pot for you. Xinjiafang owed me a big favor. Back then, I was the one who picked this treasured land for them. Not to mention a few worthless eggplants, even if it was a few lives, I would have taken them away just like that. You don't look at me. Since I found Luo Yang as a helper for that boy, his life and death are 50-50. Don't stare at me. Yes, I let him fall into this trap, but he made my daughter suffer such a big loss. If I don't scheme against him, who will I scheme against? As for me, generally speaking, I don't help anyone. Even though the Emperor of Dongyue indulged in sensual pleasures, I still managed to protect most of the Dongyue imperial family. The last emperor of Southern Tang worked hard to govern the country and had great talent and vision. He could be considered a wise ruler. But now, everyone in Southern Tang has the surname Hong. According to the logic that people of the present age like to talk about, the shady business that I did was completely unreasonable. When I asked you to assassinate that boy, I told you that he was unlucky and would die sooner or later. Rather than dying on a woman's belly or in the hands of others, it would be better to die in your hands. At least his body would be intact and there would be a place to be buried. Compared to the thousands of lonely souls and wild ghosts, how could it be worse? It would have been better if the old man didn't say anything. Once he said these principles that were drier than eggplants, the young girl simply stopped walking. She carried the sunflower and looked at the city dozens of miles away. The old man was embarrassed and reached out to grab a handful of sunflower seeds. The young girl twisted her body in a fit of pique and spun around with the withered sunflower, not letting him have his way. The old man was surprised and squinted his eyes. He saw that the city in the distance was swaying in the wind and rain. His sea of chi rumbled and fell, as if heaven and earth were squeezing a line. He sighed and rubbed his daughter's mink hat, and whispered, "It is the heartless people are the most infatuated." The old man didn't get any response. Fortunately, he was already used to it. He weighed the eggplants in his pocket and found that it wasn't enough for lunch, so he picked a few more. Only then did he talk to himself. If the 20 to 30,000 people in the city can't be dispersed in time, Luo Yang's move will incur the wrath of heaven and the wrath of men. The people of the three religions and Longhu Mountain can't even fend for themselves. But according to Li Shaoxin's temperament of the two Zen temples, he will definitely make a move. Before entering first pin, especially below second pin, there is a simple way to break through the armor. One punch will break through the armor, and one sword will pierce through the armor. It is clear at a glance. But after entering second pin, especially after first pin, there is no such thing as this method is too inflexible. People are alive. Dong Tai's sword can be said to be the pinnacle of swordsmanship. Can easily break through thousands of armors. However, if the person wearing the armor knows martial arts, the power will be greatly reduced. If Wang Shenji wears the armor, even Dong Tai can't easily break through the armor. Could Dong Tai be a beginner in swordsmanship? The sages of the three religions are blessed by heaven. Li Shaoxin cut the river to send a gift to Dao De sect. If the river water was thrown down, it wouldn't be difficult to drown thousands of Beimang people. But how could it drown a few second pin martial artists? This is the reason why the sages of the three religions don't enter the martial arts evaluation. If they want to borrow the power of heaven and earth, they have to act according to God's will. Wang Xianji and Tuoba don't need to do that. In the past 200 to 300 years, there are only 3 cases where the sages of the three religions killed more than one person. The first one was when the Wu family broke through 10,000 cavalry with 9 swords. The second one was when Li Chungang broke through 2,600 armors with 1 sword. The last one was when Luo Yang went south not long ago. Not only were the opponents fully equipped with armors, but they were also skilled in martial arts. Especially the latter two, after reaching the celestial state, even if it wasn't as obvious as the sages of the three religions, they would more or less be influenced by fate. Sometimes, killing a nameless pawn would cause more trouble than killing a general. Zhao Go took the lead to send the elite cavalry to drive away the people in the city. This is mostly the idea of Master Lu Hao. An old man who doesn't die is a thief, and a thief is a coward. Master Lu Hao is afraid that Luo Yang will be unscrupulous when she attacks. When the purple thunder strikes, even if Luo Yang bears 70 to 80% of the damage, he will be affected by it. However, he has stayed in the celestial state for too long and is suspected of being a follower of the emperor, so he will still be punished. You should know that the saying that those who don't know are not guilty is most suitable for those in the celestial state. The people of the three religions, because they know too many secrets of heaven that they can't reveal, have their hands tied. Luo Yang's time in the celestial state is relatively short, and she is not a member of the three religions, so she can do whatever she wants. The girl squatted on the ground and silently kneaded the mud. Huang Longshi, who occupied the top 3 ranks of spring and autumn, exhaled a mouthful of fog and said softly, "Those who don't know me ask what I want. Who knows who I am? Sun Ping knows the half-tongue of Great Peace City. But we have different ideals and paths. Li Shan, the poison warrior of Bailiang, knows, but 2 tigers cannot live on one mountain. There is no place for him in Liang. Nalan Yusi also knows, but he is born the opposite of me. The scholar rules the country, the scholar rules the world, and the scholar brings disaster to the country. These 3 people each have their own desires, and I'm afraid this is the last bright time for the strategists. In the future, we won't be able to see such a scene of our generation of scholars turning the world upside down. In the future, the scholars are all actors in the imperial family." The old man with a full bag of eggplants smiled and said, "The backbones of the scholars of spring and autumn are crooked. I want to straighten them out. The martial artists of spring and autumn use their power to restrict. I want to destroy thousands of secret manuals, put reins on them, and turn wild dogs into domestic dogs. I want to teach the world in the next few hundred years. There won't be any Jianghu green-robed men wielding swords. There won't be any Earth Immortal dynasty traveling to the North Sea and sunset at Kanggu, and there won't be any Taoist ascending to the heavenly gate on a crane." The girl, Jia Jia, laughed. Huang Longshi suddenly laughed self-mockingly. "In the past, Li Shaoxin scolded me for thinking that I was righteous even when I farted. He scolded me well. The girl's stomach rumbled with hunger. The old man laughed and took her to the village. The Shin family did not know Huang Longshi's true identity and only thought that he was a mysterious celestial alchemist. In the past, Huang Longshi had pointed out the right path, allowing the Shin family of Southern Tang to escape a disaster and leave behind this bloodline. Even the genealogy of the family's lifeblood was written by Huang Longshi himself. When the elders of the imperial family in the village heard that their benefactor had come to visit, they insisted on setting up a feast. However, Huang Longshi did not agree and only borrowed a kitchen and a jar of wine to be alone with his daughter Jia Jia. The old man personally cooked and fried a carp and a plate of eggplants. The old man did not eat much and only drank a few cups of wine before he became drunk. The room was dim and the candlelight swayed. The old man rested his head on the table with drowsy eyes. When he closed his eyes, his tears were faintly discernible. He murmured softly, "1,000 years of affairs with banana deer. I dream of butterfly dreaming of me?" Chapter 853. The little girl took off her warm mink hat and gently put it on the old man's head. She rested her chin on the table and looked at the sleeping old man, lost in thought. In the city, both sides were in high spirits. The world only left a line to form a sword. Luo Yang, the world's #1 devil, performed an unprecedented sword move in the celestial state. Song Nianqing's ears, eyes, nose were bleeding, but he kept his mouth shut. In the city, the broken swords were still intact. Under the support of the round sword embryo, 6-sword chi as thick as an adult man's thigh stood between heaven and earth. There was a faint sound of bells and drums, melodious and surging. The line between heaven and earth was like grinding a millstone, and the gap was only the height of a person. Sand and pebbles were flying in the dark, but it still couldn't destroy the 6-sword embryos on the spot. This time, the master of Swordpool, who didn't put on airs, only changed into a new pair of plain green cloth shoes. At this time, the soles of the shoes made of many layers of white cloth were mostly worn out, which made Song Nianqing feel a little regretful. In this life, he focused on the sword Dao and never had any romantic feelings. He didn't know why he and the woman who married into Swordpool had stopped at treating each other with respect. But for some reason, in the face of a great enemy and on the line of life and death, he remembered the night when he lifted her veil and her shy face under the candlelight. After so many years, he didn't know when she slowly became a frost-haired old woman. Nor did he know when she made this pair of shoes herself. When they parted and took over the luggage that he regarded as a burden, he only thought it was natural for a woman to take care of the family. Now, he realized how good it would have been if he took over the luggage, called her nickname, and thanked her. Song Nianqing remembered many things in the past. When he was in the prime of his life, he carried 12 swords and went to the martial emperor city in high spirits to challenge the world's #1. When he left home, she didn't say much. She just smiled and helped him tidy his clothes carefully. She walked him to the door and stood there alone, not waiting for him to turn back. Later, when Song Nianqing returned home, he passed by her with a cold face. She wanted to say something but stopped. She just squeezed out a clean smile without any grievance. In the past, Song Nianqing had always been indifferent, so it was inevitable that he would feel a little gloomy. Why had he found such a dull and boring woman? How was she worthy of his sword? This fatal absent-mindedness should have caused Song Nianqing's accumulation of power to be thwarted. Unexpectedly, in that moment of absent-mindedness, for the first time in his life, he felt guilty. Song Nianqing only felt that his sword heart was as clear as glass in that instant. Outside the city, there were originally more than 100 Swordpool swordsmen carrying huge sword sheaths on their backs. Before Luo Yang made her move, they had already begun to gallop around the city. Wherever they passed, flying swords would fly out of their sheaths and float in the air outside the city walls, stopping and not falling. Outside the city, there were already nearly 1,000 swords hanging in the air. The sword formation was majestic, the sword momentum vast and mighty. But the swordsmen of Swordpool who had reined in their horses looked at each other in dismay, because the swords hanging outside the wall had all fallen to the ground at the same time. Without the guidance of the qi, the The sect master seemed to have given up on the idea of using the sword formation. But this sword formation should be the sect master Song Nianqing's hidden 14th sword. With the sect master's temperament, it was impossible for him to choose to wait for death in the face of a strong enemy. Since the sect master had always regarded Wang Xianji, the martial emperor, as the last opponent in his life, even if he encountered a rare strong opponent in the city, he would not end up like this. For a moment, the swordsmen who had stopped were at a loss and felt a strong sense of crisis. But when the swordsmen of Swordpool successively perceived the increasing strong sword intent in the city according to their realm, they were pleasantly surprised. Song Nianqing lowered his head and took a deep look at his shoes. He smiled slightly, allowing the 6 wisps of sword chi to vanish in the millstone and the flying wood and rolling stones to hit his face. He gently stepped on the only intact street under his feet and heavily spat out a mouthful of turbid air. Finally, he could not suppress the blood surging in his throat and spat it out in front of him. Soon it was covered by dust and disappeared. Song Nianqing said softly, "It's time to go to Jianghu for you." Song Nianqing stepped on the ground and began to run wildly. The last sword was also the last time he went to Jianghu. Song Nianqing himself was the sword. Song Nianqing's sword collided with Luo Yang's sword. Song Nianqing's clothes and skin seemed to have been cut into pieces and began to turn into a bloody mess. But this sword Dao Grandmaster did not feel it at all. He laughed heartily and flashed across a green rainbow. He gave up the mighty sword formation of 1,000 swords in exchange for a sword immortal sword that seemed inexplicable to others. This sword could be said to be invincible in the world. It tore apart Luo Yang's heaven and earth. The world was dark and cloudy. Song Nianqing's sword chi was like a painting of an immortal riding a dragon. Song Nianqing himself could not be seen. Only the sword chi, lightning, clouds, and rain could be seen. Luo Yang, who did not expect Song Nianqing to have such a sword, held her breath and concentrated. Her chi circulated 800 miles in an instant. The 3 mystical powers of the Vajrafinger and the mysterious celestial phenomenon fused together. It was obvious that she wanted to prove that Song Nianqing's fatal sword could not seriously injure her. In fact, when the two were still several feet apart, Song Nianqing was already on the verge of death. But the sword chi was still growing and majestic even when he was on the verge of death. Luo Yang pushed out with both hands. Her sleeves were torn and her hair fluttered in the wind. As if she was wrestling with a dragon, her feet kept slipping back. At this critical moment, outside the city, a bolt of lightning exploded into the city. It was so fast that when the lightning entered the city, 2 riders of the sword pool were lifted off the ground and flew into the city. The lightning broke through the wall, but the 2 swordsmen and their horses crashed into the wall that was as tall as a person. With 2 bangs, they turned into 2 pools of blood. They did not have the strength to fight back and died on the spot. Luo Yang turned her head to look to the east with difficulty. There was a trace of unwillingness and anger in her eyes. The lightning, which was well versed in the resonance of heaven and earth and was thus well hidden, arrived in the blink of an eye. Luo Yang did not expect that Song Nianqing would risk his life to use the sword immortal sword. She also did not expect that Lu Haosher would point his spear at her from the beginning, instead of the guy who wanted to kill her in the Liang Imperial Court. Luo Yang gritted her teeth. The 2 blue and red fish tried their best to reveal a small part of their ethereal body, trying to block Lu Haosher's timely sneak attack. A white shadow rushed to Luo Yang's side almost at the same time as Lu Haosher, forcibly withstanding the full force of the Celestial State's attack. Even if this reckless guy only won a blink of an eye, Lu Haosher had already brushed past Luo Yang and the sword chi. Lu Haosher was furious. After weighing the pros and cons in his heart, he did not chase after the white-clothed devil who had lost the best opportunity to severely injure him. Instead, he rushed toward the little bastard who ruined his good plan. From the center of the city to the west of the city, the back of the figure crashed through many walls. In front of the last wall, Lu Haosher's 5 fingers formed a hook, as if grabbing something from the body of the person, while his other hand punched out, smashing the guy from inside the city to outside the city. With a cold face, Lu Haosher crushed the chi in his hand, which was faintly visible like a lotus swaying in the wind. He sneered, "You overestimate yourself. You dared to ruin this old man's plan of killing two birds with one stone. This old man not only wants you dead, but also wants you to lose everything before you die." The ear-piercing scream of a woman came from inside the city. It was so sad that it made Lu Haosher's heart palpitate for no reason. Chapter 854. There are 2 more chapters for today. A person suddenly broke through the wall and left the city. The swordsmen who had just picked up their swords from the sword pool outside the wall were startled. After recognizing the young man's unfamiliar face, they felt relieved. At first, they thought it was the top 3 swordsmen in the world who had been beaten out of the city. This time, they had left the sword pool in full force. A small group had followed Li Bai to the Swift Snow Mountain Villa, while a large group of elites had followed the sect master on a secret mission. When they got close to the city, they took turns to pass a portrait. The sect master's order was simple and comprehensive. If they saw the person in the portrait, they would be killed without mercy. The nearby swordsmen on horseback also quickly gathered around. As the sword sect's unique sword-flicking mystic skill sounded, more and more swordsmen rushed over. The person in the portrait seemed to be seriously injured. After struggling for a while, he still could not stand up and sat on the ground. His face was haggard and his complexion was obscure. It was obvious that he had fallen into a miserable state where his soul, essence, chi and spirit were violently fluctuating. He did not pay attention to the swordsman of Sword Pool who had shrunk the encirclement. He clenched his fists and stared at the old man in embroidered clothes on the other side of the hole in the city wall. He had lived a comfortable life in the most virtuous city in the world all year round and held a high position. The old man's aura was strong. The difference between the aura inside and outside the city was obvious. In the dim light, Master Lu Hao, who was not inferior to the young man in the north, slowly walked out, making the people of Sword Pool feel suffocated. Only a few people with the best cultivation of swordsmanship managed to stop their mounts from retreating. Most of the swordsmen involuntarily followed their horses and retreated. Master Lu Hao sneered in his heart. This kid had been shrewd and sneaky for more than 20 years. He even managed to leave the great peace city alive. He did not expect that he would get carried away, and in the end, he could only seek his own death. If he had not blocked the side of the female devil, Master Lu Hao could have cooperated with Song Nianxing's Earth Immortal Sword and seriously injured the new leader of Zhulu Mountain. If this kid had been smarter, he would have fled the city earlier and allowed Luo Yang to hold him and Song Nianxing back. Although there was a slim chance of survival, there was still a slim chance of survival. Since this kid did not want to die, Master Lu Hao would not be courteous to him. During the 4 to 5 li journey, Master Lu Hao, who was a master of celestial state, not only dispersed the kid's vigorous chi that was desperately protecting his body, he also took the opportunity to pull out the half-open big yellow lotus from his dantian. This was an unexpected surprise. Even Master Lu Hao, who was used to seeing storms, could not help but laugh to the sky. He had worn out his iron shoes to search for something, but found it without any effort. Back then, he had failed to kill that female sword immortal in the capital. All these years, he had been unable to eat or sleep in peace. Now, not only was Lame Su's lifespan almost up, if he could kill this young man who should have died in the womb back then he would have no more worries. The Lu family of Nanyang, who worshipped him as their ancestor, might not necessarily be unable to surpass him and become a new noble family that rose after the smoke of war. Lu Haosher walked from the inside of the city to the outside of the city. From the moment he took away the golden lotus that was the foundation of the great yellow court, he did not stop for even a moment. His hands that came out of his sleeves were constantly and secretly tapping his fingers, completely tearing apart the chi around the young man so that he could no longer create a new climate. The 2 great masters of Great Peace City, Han Diaosi was in the open while Lu Haosher was in the dark. Their identities were completely different and their methods were completely different. However, there was one thing that they were very similar, and that was that they were too lazy to care about the righteousness of Jianghu. They were very practical, just like the political skills of the blue-eyed Zhang Julu. Lu Haosher was not indecisive because of his identity as a senior, and did not let his guard down because victory was in his grasp. He watched as the white-haired young man's qi gradually faded under his fingers. Lu Haoshi's eyes burned with passion, as if he had opened a jar of wine that had been in the cellar for more than 20 years. Su Fengyan struggled to stand up, but Lu Haoshi, who was watching coldly from the side, kicked him in the air. It was as if he had been kicked in the face and he fell back a few feet. Lu Haoshi continued to move forward. Every step he took seemed to be very casual, but in fact it would affect the weather of heaven and earth. As he stepped heavily on Su Fengyan's body and chaotic qi, Lu Haoshi calmly said, "The otherworldly item that helped you in Great Peace City swallowed the purple gold qi of the first heavenly master of Dragon Tiger Mountain at the Spring God Lake. Right now it is full and has not finished digesting it. It is at the moment when its yin and yang are alternating. Since you want to use it as a trump card to deal with this old man, then you should obediently avoid it and obediently act like a grandson. Why did you help the woman of Zhulu Mountain take that blow from this old man? Even if it could endure for a few more hours, it would still be better than this situation. It could only watch helplessly on the side as it suffered together with you. It could only continue to instill cultivation into you in a futile attempt to prolong its life, allowing this old man to step on both your body and its soul. Although this old man has killed countless people in his life and has countless famous experts, it is still the first time he has killed a celestial phenomenon expert so casually by working together with that human cat. How interesting." Lu Haoshi continued to move forward step by step. Every step he took, Su Fengyan would let out a muffled sound, and a cloud of dust would rise. Lu Haoshi stopped and stomped heavily on the ground. Su Fengyan's body immediately sank into a large pit. The swordsman from Sword Pool, who had taken the initiative to move away, only saw a hand at the edge of the pit. It was covered in blood, and it was unwillingly reaching out inch by inch. Lu Haoshi, who was cautious by nature, sent a secret message to Shirmu. He smiled and said, "I heard that you, the Crown Prince of Beiliang, rushed to Beimang alone. Along the way, you killed many people, including Xieling and Diwu Raccoon. When you returned to Liang during the assassination at Iron Gate, which affected the situation in the capital, even Yang Taisui was killed by you. You must be very smart, but how could you, with such a smart brain, take the initiative to be kicked by a donkey? For a she-devil of Beimang, who has no relatives or friends, you even gave up the hereditary position of the king of Beiliang? You don't even want the 300,000 iron cavalry of Beiliang?" Lu Haoshi twisted the tip of his foot, and blood splashed out of the hand that reached out of the pit. The old celestial phenomenon expert sneered and asked the third question in a sinister tone. "You don't even want to avenge your mother?" Chapter 8:55. Su Fengyan could almost only hear the sound of his own heavy breathing. Lu Haoshi's three questions caused his eardrums to vibrate, and it was as if a bell was ringing in his heart. Su Fengyan did not dare to cut off the telepathic connection with the red-robed otherworldly item. It was not because he was afraid of death, but because he was afraid that Su Ying would be stubborn and die before him. After breaking the wall and falling to the ground, he had a hidden thought. He hoped to use the opportunity to temper the purple gold fate in Su Ying's body. Not only could he stall for time, but he could also let Su Ying recover her realm in advance. Unexpectedly, Master Lu Hao was a cunning old fox. Every step he took was full of mysteries. He only hurt Su Ying's skin but not her skin. He was indeed the old tortoise who had been hiding for the longest time in the celestial state. Su Fengyan turned over and lay flat in the pit. He forcibly cut off his connection with Su Ying's spirit and looked at the gray sky. His vision was blurry. Ever since he picked up the saber again, as long as he was determined to achieve something, he would advance step by step. He was afraid of death, so he did everything he could to cultivate the saber and nurture the sword. After reaching the first rank of Vajra, he obtained the Great Vajra, Pseudo-Finger Mystery, and used all his fate to enter Pseudo-Celestial State. He stumbled his way up and fell again and again. There were gains and losses, and he did not even have the time to be complacent. Now that he suddenly looked back, he realized that he had achieved many feats that he did not even dare to imagine before he started practicing the saber. Su Fengyan slowly closed his eyes and thought of something Su Xiao said. No one deserved to die from the beginning, and no one could not die. Su Fengyan's mind suddenly flashed with a picture of the spring god lake that he desperately wanted to remember but could not. Su Fengyan, whose consciousness was blurred, was instantly immersed in it as if he was in the picture. It was a boundless autumn with golden wheat as far as the eye could see, and a gentle breeze blew. On a small path there was a woman walking in front. She stretched out her slender hand and gently brushed the wheat, leaving an unforgettable back view. Su Fengyan's body somehow had a lofty feeling that the great Qin kingdom was destined to last forever. Su Fengyan looked down and held a heavy wheat in his hand. He suddenly raised his head, and the woman happened to turn her head. Just as he was about to see her face, the picture suddenly shattered and everything disappeared with the wind. He reached out to grab her, but the harder he tried, the more he failed. He only heard two words with a strange accent and yet contradictory as if he had heard them thousands of times. Huang Longshi, who was clearly dead drunk, slowly opened his eyes. The candlelight burned and occasionally made a faint sound like soybeans cracking. His daughter had long disappeared. The old man sighed in his heart. After he was chased out of the Shangyin Academy, he had told the emperors and ministers of the spring and autumn kingdom countless hateful things. Unfortunately, they all loved to listen to him and were intoxicated. However, he had finally found a daughter who was willing to listen to him speak the truth, but she did not like to listen to his nagging. Huang Longshi poured himself a bowl of wine and took a sip. He picked up a very tasty braised carp with his chopsticks. Of all the flavors, spicy was the most important. If it was not spicy, it would be tasteless. This time, he acted as a matchmaker for Zhulu Mountain and West Chu. He acted as the middleman. Chao Chongqing was the guest of Zhulu Mountain, while Zhulu Mountain provided money and manpower for the restoration of West Chu. He was busy, but it was only to delay the opportunity for the Zhao family to unify the world. Huang Longshi knew that everything he had done in this life was just to take advantage of the situation. Huang Zhentu, Wang Mingyin, Shenyuan Dandan, Li Chungang, Yang Taisui, Han Shengxian, Song Nianqing, including Lu Haoshi, Zhao Huangchao, Gu Jiantang, and so on, who most likely would not have a good ending. Counting with one's fingers, the older generation of Liang Jianghu seemed to have all died in one night. After the peace of the Central Plains, Huang Longshi transferred the fate of the world to Jianghu. The boiling water seemed lively, but it was nothing more than pulling up seedlings to help them grow and draining the pond to catch fish. The imperial examinations flourished. The imperial court, which revered only Confucianism, became more and more disciplined. The Jianghu, which was struggling at death's door, became more and more silent. The common people were at peace. Huang Longshi grabbed the mink hat from his head and glanced at the sunflower on the table. He smiled bitterly and said, "Daughter, why are you joining in the fun? I was still thinking that there was someone left who could clean my grave for me in the future." A young girl ran out of Xinjiafeng, her raven hair slanted. Outside the small city of Liang that was not even worth mentioning, Luoyang got rid of Song Nianqing a little faster than Lu Haoshi expected. This was usually negligible, but here it was enough to turn the world upside down. In the history of the world, there were only a few sword immortals who had become land immortals. Many sword immortals only had one sword or one move that reached the land immortal realm. Wei Chao, the sword immortal of the previous dynasty, was like this. Song Nianqing's sword was unstoppable. In Lu Haoshi's view, even Wang Shenji and Tuoba would have a headache if they were to fight against it. Song Nianqing's sword was already at the peak of the way of the sword. Lu Haoshi had been influenced by Song Nianqing for a long time in the celestial realm. If he were to encounter it, he could only retreat. That year in Tai and City, the woman who had reached the land immortal realm was able to escape unscathed with that sword. It was enough to show the supreme power of the land immortal realm. Song Nianqing's sword that broke through two realms without any warning was undoubtedly a great harvest for Lu Haoshi. It also made Su Fengyan and the woman in white suffer. In Lu Haoshi's original plan, since he had sensed the existence of Luoyang, he could only take advantage of the situation. After entering the city, no matter if he killed or seriously injured Su Fengyan, he could only retreat after one attack. Lu Haoshi admitted that he had no chance of winning against Luoyang, who could combine the heaven and earth into a single line of sword. It was the same when he met her before. However, after she took Song Yanqing's sword without hesitation, Lu Haoshi did not think that there was such a big disparity between victory and defeat. The woman in white gave up the power of the sword that combined the heaven and earth and rushed to Su Fengyan's side. Her eyes were unreadable. Lu Haoshi, who was secretly drawing with his fingers, sneered, "Demon Luoyang, who ranked fourth in the world, is actually so reckless?" Luoyang, who had her back to Lu Haoshi, did not say anything. On the wall, a bright vermilion robe finally appeared. The otherworldly item held its head with its 5 arms and grabbed both sides of its face. Its sharp nails drew blood, and it was in so much pain that it could not make a sound. In the city, Song Yanqing, whose body was badly mutilated, staggered and sat on the ground. He reached out his trembling hands and struggled to take off his severely damaged cloth shoes. He gently held them in his arms and died in Jianghu. The black carp that Luoyang relied on for survival had already dissipated in the sword energy in the city. Another red carp with long whiskers, which was also taken from Emperor Qin's mausoleum, appeared out of thin air. Luoyang broke all of the dragon whiskers, and the dragon whiskers quickly merged into the blood vessels in her palm. Lu Haoshi suddenly shook his sleeves. Luoyang in white seemed to be hit hard in the back. After shaking violently, she did not fall. She leisurely exhaled a mouthful of golden mist and said softly, "I won't wait anymore. What you gave me 800 years ago, I will return it to you today. From now on, there will be no Qin empresses or Luoyang in this world. What will happen to you and her in the future?" Luoyang bit her thin lips and stopped talking. She let Lu Haoshi's qi hit her back again and again. She exhaled the rich cultivation that she had accumulated for hundreds of years, which turned into a cloud of golden mist and filled Su Fengyan's body. Lu Haoshi's face changed dramatically. Without hesitation, he began to retreat. Su Fengyan slowly stood up. His eyes were golden, and he stretched his body as if he was showing off to the world. Then, he quietly looked at the woman in white in front of him and said in a mellow voice, "Luoyang." The woman's figure gradually swayed and began to dissipate in the wind. Tears streamed down her face, but she bent down with a smile and pulled back her sleeves. It was just like the first time they met 800 years ago, when he had yet to proclaim himself emperor, when she was in the fields and had yet to enter the palace. Using a delicate voice that the devil Luoyang would never utter, she softly called out, "Your Majesty!" Chapter 856. In Xiangfan City, there was a graceful woman wrapped in silver like a fur coat. It was hard to imagine that 20 years ago it was a ghost city filled with a gloomy aura. She looked like a widow from a poor family who married into a rich family and suddenly changed her appearance. There was no trace of poverty, only the splendor of jewelry. A carriage slowly moved through a quiet and deep narrow alley. The horse's hooves clattered against the limestone floor, creating a series of crisp sounds. The coachman was a beautiful woman. She was called Apricot Flower in the Prince of Jing'an's estate. Everyone knew that she was young Master Lu's personal maidservant. As that blind young Master Lu's position in Xiangfan became more and more stable, her status also rose along with it. Even the head steward of the Prince of Jing'an's estate had to squeeze out a smile when he saw her. He was afraid that she might blow a pillow wind at young Master Lu's side. As for whether she really had intimate relations with young Master Lu, only the heavens knew. Who in the Prince of Jing'an's estate didn't know that young Master Lu was the #1 favorite of the young vassal king? Xinghua, a man of sacrifice whose real name was Lu Lingbao, carefully pulled up the curtain. Lu Su walked out of the carriage and pushed the door to the private courtyard. Xinghua could only wait outside the courtyard and did not dare to look at the courtyard door. There were 2 small courtyards. Originally, there were 2 begonia plants in the courtyard. However, begonia plants could not withstand the sunlight. The courtyard was dark and did not absorb the sunlight. One of them had already died. Lu Su went straight to the main room. Before he went up the stairs, he stopped. A woman who was guarding the door was frowning. When she saw Lu Su, she was first surprised and then happy. She quickly walked down the stairs and kept a good distance from him. She said respectfully and softly, Greetings, young Master Su. Lu Xuan smiled lightly and bowed his head slightly. He did not lack etiquette. Although he disliked this woman of unknown origin and never hid it in front of the young lord, he would not make an enemy out of her if he had to deal with her. There was a sound of porcelain smashing on the ground. Lu Su looked up at the main room and frowned. Since Jinwu the Great stepped on the boat at the Spring Lake, the king of Jing, and returned to Xiangfan City in a daze, he had not shown up for many days. Many important political affairs that needed to be annotated by the Lord were delayed. Although he was worthy of the title of the most intelligent person in the Jing palace, it had always been taboo for counselors to overstep their boundaries. The woman sighed and said, "Young Master Lu, please come in and persuade him. His Highness has only been drinking ever since he came back. He has eaten nothing." Lu Xuan nodded and walked up the stairs. The woman followed him closely. She was dignified but charming. She looked like the princess who died with the king of Jing. She gently pushed the door open for Lu Su. In the room, Zhao Sun's hair was disheveled. He was sitting in the corner with his back against the wall. Dozens of wine jugs were rolling around him. He smelled of wine and did not look like a lord at all. When he saw Lu Su, he felt guilty at first and then became angry. He picked up the wine jug with trembling fingers. The jug was empty. The young lord, who was almost as famous as his father in Xiangfan City, waited for a long time but did not get a drop of wine. He threw the wine jug and smashed the only remaining porcelain bottle on the shelf. Lu Xuan was blind but not blind. He was not surprised by Zhao Sun's depression. His Royal Highness had not experienced many twists and turns in his life. After he became the new king of Jing, his life was smooth. However, when he was on his way to the top, his dignity was trampled on by the enemy he hated the most. Lu Su did not comfort him. Instead, he turned around and took a new wine jug from the woman. He sat opposite Zhao Sun and handed it to the young lord, who only dared to hide and drown his sorrows in wine. When he heard the woman's footsteps and the sound of the door closing, he said slowly, "Crown Prince Bailiang is really the reincarnation of Jinwu Great Emperor. That is a good thing." Zhao Sun, whose eyes were cloudy, was stunned for a moment. Then he regained some clarity. He took the wine jug and stopped drinking. Instead, he stared at the true backbone of Xiangfan. Lu Su said calmly, "Back then, the theory of yin-yang and 5 elements was popular in the Shangyin Academy. Huang Sanja claimed that Liang, who had the fire element, was going to unify the world. The nemesis of fire was water. Bailiang ruled the northwest and had the Wudong Mountain, which worshipped Jinwu Great Emperor. It was said that 800 years ago, Jinwu Great Emperor came to the world and became the emperor of the Qin dynasty. The Qin dynasty originated from the southern border of Bailiang. This was the reason why the imperial astronomer instigated the case of the white clothes in the capital. For the emperor, who did not care about the common people and ghosts, he would rather believe in the change of the dynasty and the change of the 5 elements than not. The old lord is the adopted son of Wang Xianji of the Emperor of War City. There was also the disturbance of Jinwu Great Emperor coming to the world at the Lake of Spring. I don't believe that the emperor can sit still. I believe that Wang Xianji can ignore the imperial edict, but I don't believe that Wang Xianji can resist the temptation of fighting with Jinwu Great Emperor. What other competition in the world could be more suitable than the battle with God Yujing, who had walked down from the celestial heavens, as the finale? The imperial court can tolerate His Royal Highness, who has already gained power, but it will never accept a king of Bailiang who has ambition and fate. Why don't you make a bet with me on whether Wang Xianji will leave the city in the near future?" Zhao Sun's eyes lit up. He did not care about the disrespect in Lu Su's words towards the royal family. He clapped his hands and laughed. "That makes sense. I won't bet. I'll definitely lose." Chapter 857. Lu Xuan stood up and patted the dust off. He said to himself, "A vassal king has been drinking for a few days. What a scandal. You are not afraid of being laughed at by Lu Su? But are you not afraid of being laughed at by women? I have only heard that men like to puff themselves up in front of the women they like. But I have never heard of a man pretending to be a coward in front of a woman." Zhao Sun smiled in relief, but he was still a bit embarrassed. Fortunately, the blind scholar could not see it. Zhao soon put down the flagon and stood up abruptly. He straightened his messy clothes. Outside the house came a man's deep voice and suppressed coughing. Zhao soon hurriedly opened the door. He did not even look at the face of the prince's mansion's men of sacrifice. He directly took a section of the secret letter that was secretly delivered to Jing and Palace by a carrier pigeon. After opening it, his face turned red and his handsome face was so excited that it was twisted. He read the few words of the secret letter several times before he clenched it tightly in his hand. He turned around and walked quickly to hug Lu Su. He laughed and said, "Mr. Lu really can predict the future. He is not inferior to Huang Sanjia. He is out of the city." The woman standing far away in the courtyard secretly looked over and happened to see the handsome face of the blind man who seemed to have everything under control. She did not know why, but her intuition told her that Mr. Lu, who was smiling peacefully, was not smiling. In the Shin family square, which stood aloof from worldly affairs, smoke rose in spirals from kitchen chimneys and the sound of chickens and dogs. A Confucian in a green robe with white hair on his temples walked in. He looked elegant and graceful. When he was young, he must have been a handsome man who could make many women fall in love at first sight. He stood quietly under a row of lush feng shui trees at the entrance of the village, as if he was looking for someone. Huang Longsher walked out of the house and looked at each other. Huang Longsher hesitated for a moment but still walked toward the old man in green robe. They stood together at the entrance of the village. The curved river gurgled. The scholar in green robe chuckled and said, "A few years ago, I secretly looked through the Shin family's genealogy records. Your handwriting is still the same as when you were studying at the Shangyin Academy. This time, I guessed that you would most likely appear here, so I came to try my luck." The corners of Huang Longsher's mouth twitched. "How could I have disturbed you? The West Chu Empire is on the verge of being reinstated. There are so many things that you, Chao Chongqing, have to personally attend to." "Oh, I know. So it's old monster Wang who has left Martial Emperor City and returned to the Jianghu. But since it was this old monster who was going to deal with that pitiful worm, even if you, Chao Zhongqing, were a saint, you still wouldn't be able to stop him. Unless Deng Tea returns from the Eastern Sea, and if he is willing to join hands with you to resist the enemy. However, if you really anger Wang Shenji, no matter who he wants to kill, even the Heavenly King can't do anything about it. Even such a monster that appears only once every 500 years is qualified to fight with Ancestor Lu." Chao Chongqing smiled and asked, "If I join Luo Yang, we can't protect Su Fengyan?" Huang Longsher shook his head and said, "Something happened over there. Song Nianqing used the Earth Fairy Sword. I thought his last 14th sword was at most a celestial phenomenon. I didn't expect him to have cramps. Master Lu Hao seized the opportunity and was very clever. Luo Yang was careless this time. If you want that kid to be safe, you can only hope that he won't have cramps like Song Nianqing and invite the Jinwu Great Emperor's Dharmakaya after the Spring God Lake. Otherwise, even if Wang Shenji's original intention was to give face to the Zhao family's son and go out of the city to put on a show, he might be itching for a good fight. But it's easy to invite a god but hard to send one away. Not to mention that this kind of fake immortal can't withstand Wang Shenji's full attack. Even if Wang Shenji let him go, he would still make that kid lose a layer of skin. From my point of view, it's possible that someone around him will die. Luoyang, Su Longxiang, or Su Xiao?" Chao Chongqing sighed and said, "Why does it sound like Jinwu's reincarnation doesn't have any benefits?" Huang Longsher sneered and said, "It's a broken business that's destined to lose money. Look at that kid in the past 20 years. Who around him has it easy? If there's really such a thing as the reincarnation of a celestial being, then Jinwu's incarnation of the Great Qin dynasty 800 years ago was born. Now, not to mention Jinwu Great Emperor, even if the three old masters sitting in the Three Pristines Hall came down to the mortal world, they wouldn't be of any use. Because it's against the law of heaven, they would still be suppressed by the Zhao family. Only after 300 years and 14 years later will..." Chao Chongqing smiled and asked, "Will what?" Huang Longsher sneered and said, "You'll know when you live for another 300 or 400 years. Chao Chongqing smiled and said, "No matter what happens in the next few hundred years, living in the world, There are many things in the present that we should do our best without going into a dead end. Then, in the end, we'll still have a clear conscience. For the first time, Huang Longshu asked someone else a question. What about the girl that Li Chungang likes? Chao Chongqing joked. Even you can't predict? Huang Longshu said indifferently. There are many people that I can't predict. Chao Chongqing sighed and said, the Shengwu city's killer cat. The princess and I were watching the battle. If it wasn't for the sword that went to the Shengwu city, there would be another sword that fell from the sky. Huang Longshu said, we're just a wild old man's words. As for the Jianghu, it's just a dying flash. Chao Chongqing laughed it off. A tall and sturdy old man with a head full of white hair did not take the flat road. Instead, he chose to go deep into the mountains and forests where there were few people. He only slowed down slightly when he was near the city, but he was still far faster than a horse. The old man in hemp shoes and hemp clothes stopped for the first time since he left the city in the Eastern Sea. A beautiful young woman pressed her hands on the hilt of an ancient sword that was inserted into the ground. She blocked the path of Wang Xianji from the Shengwu city. She only had the great Liang dragon sparrow, but she was facing the most powerful person in the world who had dominated the Jianghu for 60 years. Chapter 858. This chapter is a little late. The second chapter is before 12 o'clock. The third chapter is before dawn. The old man who had been in charge of the martial emperor city for 80 years looked at the great Liang dragon sparrow from the sword tomb of the Wu family and nodded. Needless to say, with just this sword, he was qualified to challenge Wang Xianji's sword. Jiang and I bit her lips. She would be lying to herself if she said that she was not nervous at all. She could not be nice to old man Li, who was wearing a sheepskin coat, because the senior who taught her calligraphy but did not practice swordsmanship did not have the slightest arrogance. Instead, he looked like an old man who liked to boast. She was not afraid of Chao Zhongqing, because in her heart, Chao Guanzi had always been that uncle she had seen in the West Chu Imperial Palace waiting for the imperial order when she was young. He was kind and amiable. She did not think much of Chao Guanzi's so-called outstanding martial cultivation of the eight-dipper celestial phenomenon. But Wang Xianji was different. Even in the beautiful cage in the bitter cold Bailiang, she had heard of how the old man with the surname Wang suppressed all the heroes in the world. He claimed to be the second in the world, and no one dared to claim to be the first in the world to mock the whole Jianghu. He broke the wooden horse and ox, defeated Dong Tai, defeated Chao Chongqing, defeated Gu Jiantang. All the masters of Liang who were on the Wushu list had lost to this old man who never left the city. Old man Wang became a whetstone for the whole martial arts. How sharp the others were, they had to go to East Sea and Martial Emperor City to be sharpened to convince the masses. Countless Jianghu talents dreamed of fighting with old man Wang. Even if they lost in one move, they would be proud of it. The scariest part was that in the 100 years that Wang Xianji was in, the pugilistic world was filled with layers upon layers of mountains and giant peaks confronting each other. Various pugilistic world geniuses were born in large numbers and could be said to be endless. It was far from what the previous 100 years of pugilistic world could compare to. However, Wang Xianji was still unshakable and left the world behind. It was widely acknowledged that only the demon-slaying platform from 60 years ago, Qi Xuanjin, could be compared to him. Unfortunately, after Qi Xuanjin, another immortal from Taoism, Hong Shixiang, had just entered the pugilistic world and left. Therefore, Wang Xianji was still worthy of being called invincible in the world. Even Li Chungang, who had extremely high standards, admitted that even if he re-entered the realm of Sword Immortal, he would still be no match for the old monster Wang. Jiang and I hesitated and said, Castellan Wang, Uncle Chao said that you were going to kill Su Fengyan. Wang Xianji's voice was loud and clear. He said calmly, this old man had an oath with the late emperor of Liang. In this old man's lifetime, no matter if the king of Jing and Zhao Hong succeeded in seizing the throne or not, I have to ensure that this adopted son and his lineage will be rich and prosperous. Zhao Heng's death has a lot to do with Bailiang. However, this old man is not so despicable to get entangled with a junior. Otherwise, when the crown prince of Bailiang, Su Fengyan, carried a bowl and ascended the building, even if Dong Tai personally escorted him, it would not be so easy. This time, this old man left the city because he heard that Su Fengnian invited the Dharma image of the great emperor of Jinwu at the Spring God Lake. Furthermore, a reclusive old celestial being from the Taoist sect came out of his body and brought a secret decree to marshal Emperor City. This old man has never had the chance to fight with Qi Xianzhu in his entire life. Coincidentally, he wanted to take this opportunity to witness the magnificence of a celestial being. Jiang and I wanted to say something but stopped. Wang Xianji smiled faintly and said with a pleasant expression, "This old man knows that your real name is Jiang Si. You are the princess of the fallen West Chu. You carry the great fortune from the great Qin dynasty to the West Chu. Your body's foundation is also excellent. Li Chungang is guiding you in the way of the sword, and Chao Chongqing is sparing no effort to help you maintain your realm. That is why there is such a magnificent scene of a woman riding a flying sword today. To the Jianghu it is not easy. This old man has been overseeing the martial emperor city for many years. Other than those who have no attachments and want to die, he has never destroyed a good talent in the Jianghu. The reason why Chao Chongqing dared to let you block the way alone is presumably because he is sure that this old man will not make things difficult for you. This old man might as well be frank. The reason why I, Wang Xianji, am able to achieve what I have today is largely because Li Chungang did not hesitate to ruin his reputation and allowed me to break his sword, the wooden horse, and the ox. Furthermore, this old man entered the Jianghu because he was envious of Li Chuangong's famous sword. Jiang Si, since you are his disciple, this old man will not take the initiative to harm your life and destroy your realm. You can rest assured about this. However, how can this old man not see that your realm is unstable? Before you truly enter the land immortal realm, every time you use the earth immortal sword, it is a desperate move that will reduce your lifespan. Therefore, this old man would like to advise you. Since you know that you can't stop me, don't easily fight because of your personal feelings. This old man has watched the Jianghu in the Eastern Sea for more than 80 years, but only one female sword immortal, Wu Su, appeared. I really don't want you to die halfway. Jiang Si shook his head. Wang Xianji smiled. This old man has never forced people to do things against their will. The reason why he said so much is mostly because of your relationship with Li Chungang. If you retreat without using a sword, you will definitely not be satisfied. It will also be detrimental to your sword heart. Jiang Si said seriously, I have 2 swords. Wang Xianji laughed heartily. There was actually someone in this world who dared to bargain with him. He said in a clear voice, 2 swords is fine. Let this old man see if the disciple of Li Chungang and Chao Zhongqing will disappoint with the addition of the great Liang Dragon Sparrow. Jiang Si said methodically, This year, Uncle Chao secretly took me to the Wu family's sword tomb and Dongyue sword pool. I climbed up the Wu family's sword mountain filled with famous swords and also saw the deep pool with hundreds of thousands of ancient swords. Wang Xianji was very experienced. After thinking for a while, he said, It is the superior sword way of seeing thousands of swords and then recognizing them. Chao Guanzi's spirit has always been rare. The sword way he taught you is naturally not ordinary. Jiang Si shook his head and said, At first, Uncle Chao had this intention, but I accidentally affected the qi in 2 places. Then, I accidentally changed to a different sword way. But it is only a prototype now. Uncle Chao said that this move will become stronger when facing a strong opponent. If the opponent is not City Lord Wang, but an ordinary person, it will not be so powerful. Chapter 859. Wang Xianji smiled and said, Little girl, you don't have to explain to this old man so clearly. This old man can't wait for someone to seriously injure this old man. When Wang Xianji said this, there wasn't the slightest bit of pretentious arrogance, because this was the principle of heaven and earth. Jiang and I blushed slightly and nodded. Jiang and I slowly closed her eyes. Her hands that were pressing on the hilt of the great Liang Dragon Sparrow sword floated up a few inches, and the famous sword was unsheathed. Wang Xianji looked up at the sky, nodded, and praised, Interesting. Jiang and I, who had just raised her hands, suddenly pressed down, and the great Liang Dragon Sparrow returned to the scabbard. She lightly shouted, Place your piece. Place a piece on the chessboard. Where was the chessboard? What was the piece that was going to be placed on the chessboard? The majestic old man's expression remained calm, but a strange light flashed in his eyes. He had actually underestimated this girl. In his eyes, the first move of unsheathing the sword and returning it to the scabbard could be considered a small matter, but what happened next had some great significance. The clear sky was instantly cut into countless crisscrossing ravines. Sword chi. Thousands of sharp sword chi raged in the sky. Two mighty waves of sword chi, one from the Wu family sword tomb, the other from the Dongyue sword pool, like a black and white double line drawing a chessboard. With the sword chi as the line, with the sky as the chessboard, what a big move. Wang Xianji instantly understood the subtlety of it. The little girl was right when she said that one would become stronger when facing a strong opponent. It was because the opponent was Wang Xianji that the waves of sword chi from the sword tomb and sword pool came so quickly and densely. Wang Xianji's smile deepened. She was really an honest and adorable girl. No wonder Li Chungang valued her so much. When Jiang and I uttered the two words, the sword chi in the sky was like a torrential downpour, falling down in unison. Furthermore, the falling was not without order, but all the sword chi was pointed at Wang Xianji, so much so that it seemed like a majestic tornado on land. Wang Xianji did not move, allowing the sword chi to pour down from above his head. However, the sword chi, without exception, was stirred up dozens of feet above his head. When the last sword chi dissipated, it was only 3 feet away from Wang Xianji's head. The old man in hemp shoes and hemp clothes did not move at all. Just like that, he withstood all the ancient sword chis that came from thousands of miles away with only the vigorous gang chi that flowed out of his body. Wang Xianji looked at the pale-faced young woman and said calmly, "Indeed, it is still in its infancy. This old man is looking forward to the scene of you attracting 2 real sword mountains like a swarm of locusts." Wang Xianji sighed in her heart. This woman actually had the aura of becoming the master of all the famous swords in the world. How many years had it been since he felt that the younger generation would surpass him? Wang Xianji said solemnly, "Jiang Si, this old man is very curious about your second sword." Su Fengyan's phoenix eyes, which were originally slightly feminine, turned into a strange golden color. His entire person seemed to have the aura of a monarch. He reached out his hand and grabbed Luo Yang, whose body and soul were unstable. He chuckled and said, "As long as I don't die and I don't let you go, where can you go?" 800 years ago, the necromancer who went to the sea to visit the immortals had already asked for an elixir of immortality. However, you secretly destroyed it. Do you think I don't know? I just don't want to argue with you." After saying that, Su Fengyan ignored the astonished Luo Yang. He turned his head and shook his head at the otherworldly item in the red robe on the wall. The otherworldly item instantly quieted down. Su Fengyan pressed his forehead with one hand and closed his eyes. Then, he opened them again and cleared his mind. He smiled and said something contradictory. "I'm really me. Everything comes from the same origin. I can't escape from the fate of being alone. After the time it takes to burn an incense stick, will I still be me? Will you still be you?" He pulled Luo Yang, who was crying and laughing unknowingly, and carried her on his back. Then, he strode forward and chased after Lu Hao, who had fled when he saw that the situation was not good. After a few blinks of an eye, he caught up with the guard dog of the Zhao family, who was said to have been at Celestial Phenomenon for 50 years. Su Fengyan almost ran side by side with him. He smiled and said, "Lu Hao, you were very impressive when you asked 3 questions just now." Lu Hao instantly drifted more than 30 meters away. He shouted in horror and anger, "Who are you?" The golden eyes of Su Fengyan slightly narrowed his eyes and smiled. The capital of the small country where ancestor Lu lives has been shot into a hedgehog by Great Qin's crossbows. If Great Qin's elite soldiers don't die, they will destroy you all. Lu Hao was so angry that he laughed. "Su Fengyan, are you crazy?" The reason why people in Jianghu were polite to those monks and nuns was because they were afraid of their strange hands. It was the same reason why swordsmen were afraid of encountering a new sword. Unless one was an expert in martial arts, no one dared to say that they would not fail miserably at such an easy task. Lu Hao had guarded the imperial palace for 60 years and read all the martial arts manuals. It was not wrong to say that he was a frog in a well, but the well itself was almost as wide as heaven and earth. Lu Hao had seen too many amazing moves. He did not dare to be arrogant just because he had stayed at Celestial Phenomenon for a few decades. That year, when the young leader of Wudong entered and left Great Peace City as if there was no one there, he and Han Diaoxi quietly watched from afar. After weighing the pros and cons, they did not even have the desire to make a move. This year, Mount Longhu had another Zhao Ningxin, who was said to be the reincarnation of the first ancestor. However, Lu Hao's cautious nature did not mean that this old celestial phenomenon expert was a pushover. Killing a first-rank expert who was unwilling to fight to the death had always been as difficult as ascending to the heavens. Lu Hao returned empty-handed because he felt embarrassed. He felt that Su Fengnian was very familiar with unorthodox methods and was not easy to deal with. Su Fengnian was like a maggot in a corpse. He did not let Lu Hao pull away and asked with a smile, "It is said that the strong are bold. Why are you, a celestial phenomenon expert, so cowardly?" The sky above them was originally blue and cloudless. First there were clouds, then dark clouds. Lu Hao did not say anything as he flew. Su Fengnian glanced at the sky and stopped. Lu Hao, who was like a stray dog, also stopped. His face was gloomy. "I heard that there is a sword formation called the Thunder Pool, but how can it compare to a real Thunder Pool? To deal with an otherworldly item like you, it is very effective." Chapter 860. There is one more chapter before dawn. There is no need to wait for more. I have a pot of wine made in Jianghu. I have a palm that can support the 5 mountains. I have a mouthful that can eat the spring and autumn. Hundreds of years ago, a Jianghu elder set the rule of the first-rank 4 realms. He used these 3 sentences to praise the celestial phenomenon realm. He said that once a celestial phenomenon realm expert could resonate with the heavens and earth, they would be able to look down on the world with disdain. Lu Haoshi looked at the sky and his smile deepened. In order to become famous in Jianghu, as long as one was a Jianghu disciple, they would have a few hidden skills. For example, Song Nianqing had brought 14 swords and 14 moves on this trip. Lu Haoshi was no exception. This lightning pool was originally intended to be a big gift, waiting for the next time Chao Zhongqing, who had transcended mortality and entered holiness, came to the capital. Chao Guanzi's 3 visits to the imperial palace were like passing through corridors, slapping him in the face each time. How could Lu Hao swallow this resentment? He never thought that he would use it on that kid first. The black clouds were like ink. Lu Haoshi quietly waited for the thunder to roll. Lu Haoshi had seen many smart people who relied on shortcuts to the south to win the favor of the emperor. They were very skilled at fishing for fame. Prime Minister Zhao Danping of Qingxi was one of them. But in Great Peace City, Lu Haoshi had served 3 generations of emperors of Liang. He had always been the mainstay of that capital. Even Zhao Danping could not share the incense and friendship that Lu Haoshi had accumulated for the Zhao family. Lu Haoshi was used to using his cultivation to crush his opponents. This time, he carried the imperial order to kill Su Fengnian. He and Song Nianqing only had the first move. If they did not succeed and Su Fengnian escaped, they still had a backup plan. Therefore, Lu Haoshi had no interest in fighting for his life. But even a clay Buddha had anger. Moreover, Lu Haoshi and Beiliang were in a situation where they would not rest until one of them was dead. This Su Fengnian exuded an evil aura from head to toe. Lu Haoshi had the idea of finding out what was going on. Su Fengnian, who is still carrying Luo Yang on his back, is calm and unruffled, waiting for the heavenly tribulation to land. He only had 30 minutes. If Lu Haoshi insisted on avoiding the battle, Meng Qi did not have much confidence in capturing the old fox's Achilles heel. Celestial phenomenon experts were favored by the heavens and earth, and it was extremely difficult to capture their flow of qi. If Lu Haoshi wanted to escape, he would not be able to escape the heavenly net, because he was not an earth immortal who could attract the divine tribulation. He was like the fish that escaped the net. Even if Su Fengnian could catch up with Lu Haoshi, he could not afford to waste time. However, there is no such thing as an invulnerable move in the world. As long as Lu Haoshi is arrogant and has the courage to take root, Su Fengyan does not mind enduring the so-called rolling thunder in the pond, and then wait for an opportunity to make his move. The black clouds in the sky suddenly fell and floated on the ground. It was like a mysterious painting of the world changing, giving people a feeling of the vicissitudes of life. Su Fengyan's upper body is exposed from the clouds. The waist-high black clouds are rolling and turbulent. Lightning flashes and thunder rumbles in the surrounding clouds, and the lightning gradually intertwines into a net. Su Fengyan walks slowly, and immediately becomes the fish that is targeted by the fisherman casting the net. In the blink of an eye, purple thunder floats in the sea of clouds. At a glance, there are no less than 50 of them. They are of different sizes, as big as the mouth of a well, and as small as a fist. Between the purple thunder, there is a constantly jumping snow-white lightning connecting them. It really is a lightning pool not only in name but also in reality. Su Fengyan, who did not stop walking, is extremely daring. He reaches out and grabs a purple thunder, and the entire lightning pool flips over. More than 50 purple thunder suddenly fly over. Su Fengyan's right hand hooks into the purple thunder, and purple gas lingers around his arm. His left hand is not idle either, lightly waving it, and every time, it will hit a purple thunder that smashes towards him. However, this lightning pool is very domineering, and with Su Fengyan holding the purple thunder tightly, it does not weaken at all. This shocking and magnificent scene is not damaged at all. More than 50 purple thunder flew back, and after being hit, it bounces back about 20 zhong before rapidly spinning back. Their momentum is fierce, and their speed did not decrease, instead increasing. Su Fengyan, who is walking slowly, seems to be trapped in a moving lightning pool. The woman behind him uses her chin to touch his shoulder. Su Fengyan said softly, "I remember that I promised to accompany you to the peak of Mount Kunlun to see the Sea of Clouds, but after a few rounds of hunting, I either forgot or missed it. Later on, when I made up my mind, you were already unwilling. Today, just treat it as making up for it," she said softly. "Compared to the smoke of the whole country that you gave to that vixen, the Sea of Clouds is nothing." Su Fengyan tilted his head and gently stroked her cheek. Taking a deep breath, he placed the purple thunder in his hand that has not been released into his mouth, and swallowed it into his stomach. He laughed and said, "Back then, the whole world was eaten by me. A few small sky thunders are nothing." Su Fengyan held a purple thunder in each hand and placed them into his mouth. When he had swallowed half of the purple thunder, the Sea of Clouds dissipated, and the thunder pool also disappeared. Lu Haosher, who was standing 300 feet away, was dumbfounded. He did not expect that this guy would use such a barbaric method to break the secret art of astronomical phenomena that he painstakingly created. 50 sky thunders that were painstakingly formed with the help of the heavens and earth. The Qi cultivators of Fulong of the North sect had poured in a lot of effort to create them, and the cultivation base of a few great grandmasters had been directly squeezed dry. How could Lu Haosher not feel distressed when he lost half of his originally strong foundation? What was even more hateful was that evil horned centipede, whose cultivation base had inexplicably skyrocketed, even let out a comfortable burp. He gave Lu Haosher a sarcastic smile and asked lazily, "Why aren't you running?" Lu Haosher quickly and neatly began to retreat. "No wonder you haven't become an Earth immortal after 50 years. Su Fengyan narrowed his eyes and sneered, "If you didn't stop just now, I might not be able to do anything to you. But now it's too late." Su Fengyan stretched out a finger and cut a thin blood groove between his eyebrows. Lu Haosher, who was fleeing in a hurry, suddenly felt as if his head had been split open. A shocking crack appeared from his forehead from top to bottom. His face was covered in blood and he looked battered and exhausted. But this was not the most terrifying thing that made Lu Haosher tremble with fear. As the blood continued to flow from his face, his celestial cultivation base was like a flood that broke through a dam. Lu Haosher could clearly feel the depth of his cultivation base. It was originally like a lake that could only watch helplessly as the lake water dried up, completely unable to stop the lake's level from dropping. While Lu Haosher was feeling bitter and hateful, he also found it inconceivable. The essence of the celestial cultivation base was to live freely with the heavens and earth. It was the precursor to becoming an earth immortal and transcending the mortal world. How could one be trapped by one's own cocoon? Could it be that this guy had achieved the same level as the heavens and earth? Could it be that he could forcibly absorb the fate of others and create his own world? If it was Hong Shixiang who had cut down the fate of the 6 nations, Lu Haosher would still be somewhat skeptical. But even if the kid behind him had inherited Luo Yang's cultivation base, it was absolutely impossible for him to be so terrifying. Lu Haosher was almost possessed by the devil. He gritted his teeth and took advantage of the situation to shatter his celestial cultivation base that was already on the verge of collapse. The moment before he fell into the Shen Finger realm, he cut off his tail like a gecko and allowed the remaining half of the purple lightning to roll down. Like an earth immortal, he flew hundreds of feet away from the lunatic who had defeated him. Su Fengyan stopped and sighed in his heart. If only Lu Haosher had hesitated a little, and a little bit later he was confident that he could have killed this old dog. He looked up at the sky and sneered. Li Yang's Zhao Shi was indeed the current orthodox ruler. Even a lackey who guarded the Zhao Shi's courtyard had a considerable amount of fate. Su Fengyan turned around and looked at the dense sword energy 10 miles away. It was a grand formation. Su Fengyan silently put the purple lightning into his sleeve and melted it into his qi. Luo Yang struggled to land on the ground and said calmly, "You go." Su Fengyan held her hand and turned to look at her. She said sadly and resolutely, "You want the world. I only want you. I can't monopolize it. I'd rather not. It's been like this for 800 years, and it's still the same after 800 years. Su Fengyan suddenly laughed. "Is Qin Empresses that great?" Luo Yang looked shocked and took a step back. Su Fengyan smiled and said, "I'm him, he's not me." Luo Yang's expression was complicated. Su Fengyan squatted down and gestured for her to get on his back. He said softly, "Luo Yang, before returning to Bailiang, let's go to Luo Yang City and have a look." Luo Yang kicked his butt hard. Su Fengyan, who fell flat on his face, continued squatting and said softly, "Back then, the great Qin Iron Cavalry couldn't flatten the desert called Beimang. In this life we'll make up for it. Tuoba dared to bully my woman, Without waiting for Su Fengyan to finish, Luo Yang gently lay on his back. Su Fengyan stood up. "I'll deal with you later." Luo Yang said, "Beat Wang Xianji first." Chapter 861. It was a little late, but he didn't owe her anything. East Sea Martial Emperor City. There was a sword hovering outside the city. It had been there for a long time, so much so that the Jianghu people who were initially shocked by the sight of the 1,000 miles flying sword gradually lost their patience and interest. Some of the bored Jianghu people decided to find some entertainment by gambling on how long the sword would stay there. Those who bet early lost a lot of money. Some people in the city said that the flying sword was a challenge from the peach blossom sword god Dong Tai, and that he would soon ride a donkey into the city. Some people said that it was a sword newly comprehended by Dongyue sword pool's Song Nianqing. Some people swore that the old ancestor of the Wu clan's sword tomb was coming out of seclusion and was going to clear the name of the Wu clan's withered sword. Those who came to watch the show were waiting for the word, trouble. But since the sword didn't cause any trouble, they were used to the sword stopping outside the city. Only some naughty children born and raised in the Martial Emperor City would climb up the outer city wall from time to time and shoot the sword with their slingshots. During this period, there was a sword-wielding wanderer who wanted to amaze the world with a single brilliant feat. He stood on the sword and performed many lame sword moves. In the end, he was met with countless disdainful looks. He also felt embarrassed and resentfully jumped down and left the city. Almost no one noticed that an old man with snow-white eyebrows had arrived in the city. After he entered the city, he lived in seclusion and only occasionally went to the wall filled with the world's weapons. After looking at them for a while, he quietly returned. Every day, a famous sword would disappear without a trace. It was just that there were too many famous swords and sharp weapons on the wall. For example, Song Nianqing had brought 12 swords to challenge Wang Xianji. Except for the 6 swords that were shattered, the other 6 swords were stuck on the wall according to the old rules of the Martial Emperor City. They had been there for many years, and one of them had quietly disappeared yesterday. The one-armed old man with eyebrows that reached his knees came to the wall alone again. He looked at an ownerless sword that was higher up on the wall and smacked his lips. He seemed to be greedy. Others were greedy for beauty, food, and wine, but he seemed to be exceptionally unique. Most of the weapons on the wall were famed swords, and they took up almost half of the wall. This was not strange, as the sword forest had always been flourishing in the martial arts world. The old man stretched out 2 fingers and pinched a strand of his snow-white long eyebrows. Just as he was making up his mind to eat the new sword that he had taken a fancy to tonight, he exclaimed in surprise and turned his head to look. A Taoist priest with a sword on his back happened to be looking at him. The long-browed old man asked, "Little Taoist of Mount Longhu, why is the relic of ancestor Lu, which should be hanging on Wudong's big gung horn, with you?" The young Taoist in a plain and ordinary Taoist robe asked, "Senior, why did you enter the city and stop your sword outside?" The old man smiled and said, "This old man's last sword strike in this life is to strive for perfection, so that I can ask the strongest martial artist in the past 100 years. Originally, it was almost time to enter the city, but the one surnamed Wang unexpectedly left the city for the first time, leaving this old man hanging on the side. No matter, we can just wait for him to return to the city." "You are?" The Taoist priest replied calmly, "I am Qi Xianxia of Mount Longhu." The old man made an O sound. "I've heard of it. There is a saying in Jianghu about little ancestor Lu." Qi Xianxia, who had been traveling Jianghu since leaving Wudong, asked, "Is Lord Wang going to stop a useless monk from the western regions? May I ask who senior is?" The old man smiled and said, "What useless monk? It's Lu Songtao of Mount Zhulu. As for this old man's name, it doesn't matter. You only need to know that there is still a sword in this world that can make Wang Xianji the real second in the world." Qi Xianxia smiled gently. The old man's fingers loosened his long eyebrows and said, "Although you are a Taoist, you are also a swordsman. If this old man loses in the future, you will follow his next sword strike. It doesn't matter 10 or 20 years later, as long as it is not too long until Wang Xianji ascends." Qi Xianxia bowed slightly and then turned to leave. Lu Hao had never been so flustered before, like a drowning dog. 50 years of celestial phenomenon knowledge, in less than half an incense's time, disappeared like smoke. After confirming that the fellow wasn't chasing him, he still ran a dozen miles before stopping. He had never thought that there would be a day where he would be frightened by the mere twang of a bow. Advancing in the martial path was harder the further one went. Rank 3 to rank 2 was a huge threshold. Most of the disciples of rich families who had secret manuals and pills were stopped at this threshold. Cultivating martial arts was an extremely tough profession. It required talent as a foundation and also perseverance. After reaching rank 2 and becoming a master, one would immediately meet an even higher threshold. It was so high that many geniuses who didn't have enough perseverance would back off. Lu Hao had seen too many young people with natural advantages who couldn't enter the door and wasted their lives, not to mention rank 1 to rank 4. It was because he knew that the road was difficult that Lu Hao, who was about to reach the peak, was heartbroken over his drop in rank. Lu Hao, who was filled with hatred, sat down on the ground. His hands stabbed into the ground and his fingers formed a hook, drawing a mud ditch. Lu Hao's emotions slowly calmed down. He took out a small sandalwood box from his sleeve and carefully opened it. After opening the box, a small pill was revealed. It didn't have any fragrance. Instead, it smelled bad. However, Lu Hao solemnly stretched out 2 fingers and tried to pinch the pill. This inconspicuous bait was rumored to be half a celestial medicine recipe obtained by the Qin dynasty's emperor when he went out to sea to visit immortals. There was a secret saying in the Taoist scriptures, "If you don't accept the bait, stay in the human world and become an immortal." It meant that if one could obtain this pill, they would be able to ascend. Of course, Lu Hao knew that the pill in the box didn't have such effects. However, it could help him stabilize his current rank and fight for a chance to return to celestial phenomenon. Lu Hao suddenly retracted his fingers and closed the box. He stood up and looked around. He was still worried, so he circled around and made sure that there was no one within 2 miles. Then he sat down cross-legged and swallowed the bait. He closed his eyes and focused. Gradually, he entered the state of a dragon in the abyss. Ha ha! The two soft words suddenly rang in Lu Haoshi's ears like a real clap of thunder. Wang Xianji didn't do anything in a hurry and was very slow. However, there were too many smart people in Jianghu and there were too many shortcuts. In the end, Wang Xianji, who was down to earth, became an anomaly. After he entered the martial emperor city, his cultivation had been steadily rising. He was not the youngest second-level master at that time, nor was he like Li Chungang, who broke through the next level a few years after reaching the first level. Wang Xianji had never had a stunning breakthrough. Compared to the martial arts geniuses who were chasing after the four grandmasters, Wang Xianji could only be regarded as a late bloomer. However, after he achieved the diamond body, Wang Xianji gradually became invincible among those in the same realm. Moreover, no one had thought that this tall young man who was only fit to watch the battle at that time would become a late bloomer. Especially when he broke the wooden horse ox with his bare hands, it made Wang Xianji truly reach the top of Jianghu. Since then, Wang Xianji had never tasted defeat until he was habitually called Old Monster Wang. This taciturn old man stood alone on the top of the martial emperor city tower, coldly overlooking Jianghu. Dong Tai, who rode a donkey and carried a peach branch, proudly climbed up the tower and went down after losing. Chao Chongqing, who made the son of the Zhao family restless, also went down after losing. In the end, very few people wanted to defeat this old monster. They just wanted to climb up the tower quickly and be content. If they were lucky enough to meet this old man and ask for some martial arts experience, it would undoubtedly be a pleasant surprise. Wang Xianji didn't like this kind of Jianghu. The martial emperor city lord, who was waiting for the little girl's second sword, raised his eyebrows, not knowing whether he was surprised or angry. Her sword strike caused a ripple to appear in Wang Xianji's tranquil state of mind. The sword opened the gate of heaven. The scene of the gate of heaven opening was splendid. A pillar of the gate of heaven fell to the ground. When the other pillar was erected, the gate of heaven was opened. Jiang Anai, who was holding the sword with her hands folded, was pale. She pushed the great Liang dragon sparrow into the ground inch by inch. In order to stop Wang Xianji from moving forward, this woman actually opened the gate of heaven by force. Obviously, the gate of heaven was opened for Wang Xianji. It was obvious that she wanted to take the initiative to send this invincible martial emperor city lord on his way. Blood seeped out of the corner of Jiang Ni's mouth. She continued to push the long sword into the ground, desperately trying to pull the other gate of heaven down. Only a few people in the world knew the truth. She was just a woman who was in so much pain when she moved books up the mountain that she thought she would die. She was just a timid woman who was afraid of hardship and did not dare to practice her sword. She was just a woman who was satisfied with earning some copper coins from reading books. She had never thought about riding a sword, reviving her country, or opening the gate of heaven with a sword. Such an unattainable thing, she never thought that she could do it. She just wanted to secretly stab him to death one day when he was not paying attention. Then her life would be over. Wang Xianji still did not stop her sword from opening the gate of heaven. Wang Xianji, don't want to go through the gate of heaven. So what if the gate of heaven is opened? At this moment, Wang Xianji suddenly slid back and made a defensive posture. A figure broke through the gate of heaven and punched towards Wang Xianji. Wang Xianji slid back a full 300 feet. The second gate of heaven was about to support the gate of heaven and earth when it disappeared. Jiang and I did not even have time to spit out a mouthful of blood. She looked at the figure in a daze. The figure flashed and pounced towards Wang Xianji. It was another simple punch. Although Wang Xianji did not fall, she was fiercely pushed back 700 feet. No one in the world could make Wang Xianji, who could kill immortals, retreat 10,000 feet. Chapter 862. A gentle breeze blew past. Dust drifted in the straight line where Wang Xianji had retreated. Some of the slightly taller mounds of earth were directly smashed apart by the old man's back. Fortunately, the two parties were fighting in the wilderness, so no outsiders saw this shocking scene. Wang Xianji shook his ankles and simply kicked off the pair of tattered hemp shoes. His sleeves were also torn apart by him, revealing his thick bronze arms. His muscles were as hard as boulders and contained the power to split mountains and split cities. Martial Emperor City was built near the water and looked at the sea. Every year during the summer and autumn, there would be surging white waves. The waves would drag across 1,000 miles and hit the eastern city wall. 30 years ago, Wang Xianji would stand proudly on the eastern city wall every time there was a tornado on the sea. He would use his arms to hit the waves. In the past 30 years, 2 people had replaced him to hit the waves, but their momentum was not as great as Wang Xianji's. Martial arts had always been despised by the people of the 3 sects as they viewed it as an inferior technique that did not conform to the way of heaven. It was Wang Xianji who turned the tide with his own strength and changed the views of the people. Especially when Tuoba Bodhisattva and Shenyuan Pan achieved success and fame one after another, it made Wang Xianji, the pioneer of martial arts, like the sun in the sky, never to fall behind. Wang Xianji's expression was calm. He looked at the distance under his feet. His chi flowed and surged. His body was like the sea. In terms of internal energy, among the top 10 in the Wushu ranking, Chao Chongqing was even more outstanding than Deng Taiye, who was ranked 3rd in the world. He was right behind Tuoba Bodhisattva, but he claimed that he could not compare to Wang Xianji. In terms of combat power, the green shirt sword god 60 years ago and the old man in the sheepskin fur coat were on par. However, Wang Xianji was much stronger than him 60 years ago. This was also why in the Battle of the Eastern Sea, even when facing Li Chungang, who had returned to the peak of swordsmanship, Wang Xianji only used 90% of his strength. In the 500 years of Jianghu, there were only 6 or 7 people who were recognized as the world's number 1. In the recent 100 years, Wang Xianji was finally the one who took the throne. This old man who claimed to be the world's number 2 was undoubtedly more ferocious and invincible than the demon of Zhulu Mountain, Lu Songtao 100 years ago. Back then, Qi Xuanjin, who was 60 years old but had a youthful face, stood on the evil-slaying platform and looked down at the world. He guarded the door for the heavenly Tao, so no demons and monsters could cause trouble in the world. With the old and strong Wang Xianji as the stabilizing force in Jianghu, there was no martial artist who could stand out. Therefore, how could a new tree stand out in the Wulin world? 80 years had passed, and the 4 great grandmasters had become the top 10 martial arts appraisers that were held once every 10 years. The experts had changed again and again. No one knew what this old monster was thinking. Wang Xianji's lips curled into a hearty smile. It was finally here. The old man, who was more than 100 years old, bent his knees slightly, spread out his left hand and slowly stretched it forward. His right shoulder was tilted low, and his right hand was clenched into a fist. That uninvited guest had given Wang Xianji a gift with 2 punches, and he had sent Wang Xianji a full 1,000 feet away. There was absolutely no reason for Wang Xianji not to return the favor. The old man in coarse hemp clothes made this simple and unremarkable gesture. There was no concept of wind and clouds in the world that resonated with it, nor was there any majestic scene of flying sand and rolling stones in the surroundings. Wang Xianji withdrew his gaze and gently exhaled. His eardrums vibrated violently. After the 2 punches, the person who had passed through the divine gate did not pursue an attack. He only paused slightly 7,000 feet away, waiting for Wang Xianji to stabilize his body before he began his 3rd attack. Step by step, he left a footprint, but he did not step on the ground. Instead, he walked in the air, like a string of water ripples made by a stone. He was several feet above the ground, forming circles of airflow ripples. Every step he took was like a great bell striking Wang Xianji's heart. Not only did Wang Xianji's eardrums vibrate more and more, even his temples began to sink and protrude. Wang Xianji still did not show any signs of punching. He waited until the person took the last leap, crossing 1,000 feet in one step, and stepped heavily on the ground. He had accumulated his strength to the extreme and punched. Wang Xianji's eardrums and temples suddenly stopped moving at the same time. Only then did he punch out. The 2 fists collided. There was a loud bang. Between the 2 fists, a lake surface, spread out by the majestic Qi Ji, appeared horizontally. This thin lake surface was ferocious and distorted, and the earth-shaking sound spread through the wilderness. A few winter sparrows circled low in the air and inadvertently hit this wall of qi. They were immediately torn and shattered beyond recognition. Wang Xianji's face, which did not show any signs of aging, wrinkled like the lake water. Layers of subtle undulations appeared on his face, and then slowly returned to normal. The arms of the two who had punched out swung back at the same time. Then they changed hands and punched at the same time. It was almost another winter thunder that shook the plains. Wang Xianji smiled slightly and gently withdrew his hand. The person shook his arm and did not pester endlessly. Neither of them moved, but the distance between them was increasing. A trench was torn open in the ground, its width and length gradually rising. Wang Xianji slowly asked, "Should I call you the Prince of Beiliang or the great Emperor Jinwu?" A young man with a pair of sparkling golden eyes smiled and said, "Su Fengyan is fine." Wang Xianji looked at the strange eyes of the young man that were gradually dimming. His qi floated behind him like a long rainbow. The old man said with some regret, "So it's only for the time it takes to burn a stick of incense. I don't even know who set the rules. Boring." Su Fengyan mocked, "If you want to be interesting, why don't you go to the heavens and find a deity to fight?" Wang Xianji smiled and said, "Decaying grass becomes fireflies. Even if there really is a deity who ascends to the heavens, he may not be a good person." Su Fengyan asked, "Do you want to lose a fight in the human world so that you can willingly cross the heavenly gate?" Wang Xianji shook his head and said clearly, "Born as a human, dead as a ghost. This is the most realistic truth. As for whether deities are deities or not, in this old man's eyes, they are nothing more than thieves who are greedy for life and afraid of death. Those who steal a hook will be punished. Those who steal a country will be marquis. Those who steal life will be deities. Therefore, this old man is only willing to believe half of the talk about ghosts and deities." Su Fengyan waved his hand and said, "Let's not talk about this nonsense. It's very easy for you to kill me now. What do you say?" Wang Xianji smiled and asked, "Do you have a chance to recover your previous state?" Su Fengyan said helplessly, "It's difficult." Wang Xianji nodded and said, "As long as there is, this old man will wait for you in the Eastern Sea next time." Su Fengyan saw that the old man was about to turn around and asked, "You didn't fight with Sui Xiegu?" Wang Xianji still turned around and left. Su Fengyan swallowed a mouthful of blood and staggered back. At the heavenly gate, Jiang and I pulled out the great Liang dragonfinch with a hesitant expression. Not far from her, the white-robed Luo Yang squatted on the ground and grabbed a handful of soil, looking into the distance. Jiang and I raised her hand and controlled the red sandalwood sword box. She placed the great Liang dragonfinch on her back. Luo Yang stood up and clapped her hands. She turned around and looked at the woman who had really overturned the country 800 years ago. She sneered and said, "You're still the same kind of skin that makes men feel pity for you. But compared to the past, you have more heart and lungs now." Jiang and I was confused by her words. She had a natural dislike for this white-robed woman. She immediately glared and said, "Why do you care?" Luoyang raised his hand inexplicably and made a gesture to raise his glass and drink it in one gulp. He laughed and then asked, "Are you thirsty?" Jiang and I did not want to lower herself to the same level as this crazy woman. She caught a glimpse of the approaching figure from the corner of her eyes. She bit her lips and turned around resolutely. Su Fengyan stopped and closed his eyes. That year, the woman named Shan Hu, who was chosen as a tribute and sent into the palace, timidly walked on the path behind him and the Empress of Great Qin. She had yet to drink that cup of poison wine. Su Fengyan opened his eyes and rubbed his face. He continued to walk until he reached Luo Yang's side. Lu Haoshi, who Su Fengyan had mistakenly thought would escape back to Great Peace City, had his head chopped off by a hand blade and was kicked forward by the little girl. Chapter 863. Today's chapter. There will be a total of 6 chapters in the next 2 days. Su Fengyan originally wanted to end Jiang Hu with the battle at the Spring God Lake. This was already worthy of the saber training he had put in for the past few years. After returning to Beiliang, it would be difficult for him to be completely focused. He had reached the 4th realm of the 1st rank and had already reached the false realm 3 times. Even if there was no one else who could do it in the future, it was still an unprecedented feat. Su Fengyan no longer had any hopes of increasing his realm in the future. It was enough for him to be a local tyrant in Beiliang. But he never thought that the real game would be so tragic. Song Nianqing died in battle after being struck by an earth immortal. Lu Haosher's celestial shatter realm even had to fight with Wang Xianji in the end. Su Fengyan stood quietly beside the white-clothed demon. He had already returned all his cultivation to Luoyang. She had lost a lot of her realm. She should still be the fourth in the world, but the gap between her and Hong Jingyan and the others had inevitably shrunk. Su Fengyan himself was poor. His inner energy that had fallen to the second rank was almost gone. If the body was a building full of qi, then Su Fengyan could be said to be a house with 4 bare walls. Lu Haosher had destroyed the purple aura golden lotus seedling in the big yellow pond. This made him even more miserable. Su Fengyan silently recited the incantation. He tried to use the fire that he had comprehended in Beimang to condense his qi and observe the fire inside his body. Unfortunately, some of the fire started from the Yongquan acupoint under his feet. It was like an arrow at the end of its flight. Couldn't even pass through the Naiwen. Su Fengyan's expression withered and he gave up struggling. A breeze blew across the countryside. The smell of soil assaulted his nose. Su Fengyan's hands and feet were cold. He could only put his hands in his sleeves to ward off the cold. Luoyang asked indifferently, "How strong is Wang Xianji?" Su Fengyan stomped his feet and looked at the sky. He said softly, "Old Monster Wang only used 50% of his strength when he took the 2 punches. In the end, he used about 80% of his strength." Luoyang didn't comment on this. She calmly said, "I'll take Danning back to Zhulu Mountain. We'll meet outside the city 3 years later. You only have a few flying swords that Dong Tai gave you, so don't die on the way back." He didn't die at the hands of Song Nianqing and Lu Hao, and he didn't die at the hands of Wang Xianji. If he died at the hands of a nobody, it would be a big joke. Su Fengyan smiled calmly and said, "It is true that I do not have any backup plans, but the Zhao family's son of heaven is also at his wit's end. Without Han Diaoxi and Lu Haosher, 2 top experts, Great Peace City is only slightly better than paper. If I were Chao Chongqing, I would go directly to Jing and take the emperor's head. The Jianghu matters are over. In the future, it will depend on how Beiliang deals with each move. My martial cultivation is not important to the overall situation." Standing side by side, Luoyang said disdainfully, "In terms of family wealth, can your Su family beat the Zhao family? If Chao Chongqing dares to go to Great Peace City to cause trouble now, he probably won't have the life to revive his country." Su Fengyan frowned and said, "Isn't there only the sneaky Wu family sword tomb left for the court to support?" Luoyang smiled coldly and asked, "That's it?" Su Fengyan said emotionally, "Yes, my mother comes from the Wu family. Dong Tai is also from the Wu family. Wu Luding and his sword attendant Cui Hua are also from the Wu family. Song Nianqing's 14th sword already had such spirit. I think the master of the Su of Gojosian sword must be even more profound." Luoyang hesitated and asked, "Why don't you practice sword essence?" Su Fengyan said self-mockingly, "I have seen too many sword masters. It's not that I don't want to, it's that I don't dare." Su Fengyan suddenly came back to his senses. The sword essence, not the sword? But Luoyang had already disappeared. Standing where he was, Su Fengyan looked around. The world was clear, and the atmosphere was bleak. He was in a daze. After an unknown amount of time, he slowly closed his eyes and remembered many things of the past, many people of the past. His mind flashed to the scene where he had personally borrowed the sword at Yuan Mountain Villa, Lu Songtao's useless song after his madness, and personally seeing the world in the city merge into a line. When a person had too much money, they would often be dazzled and not know what to treasure. Su Fengyan raised his arm and waved like he was pushing away an item on a messy table. The mountains disperse. He did not see Wudong, Longhu, Hui Mountain, or any of the famed mountains. After waving away the mountains in his mind, Su Fengyan waved a second time. The rivers and seas disperse. He did not see Chunshin, Boyang, Qingdu, or any of the Jianghu. He waved a third time. The towers disperse. He did not see Xiangfan, Shenwu, Great Peace City, or any of the city's tall buildings. The fourth wave pushed back the grass and trees. The fifth wave pushed back the sun and moon. The sixth wave pushed back all life in the world. In this moment, Su Fengyan seemed to be alone in the world. His eyes were still closed, but he was looking around in the darkness, searching for something. When Su Fengyan thought that he was going to return empty-handed, he suddenly realized that he could not open his eyes. It was like the many times when he encountered a ghost during his afternoon nap before practicing the blade. No matter how hard he tried, he could not open his eyes and regain clarity. It was clearly a sign of going astray. In the past, Su Fengyan had the great yellow court of Taoism. No matter how heterogeneous or unconventional his cultivation was, he did not have to worry about falling into Qigong deviation. But now, the great yellow court no longer existed. It was the moment when Su Fengyan's foundation was the most unstable. He had a sudden idea. He wanted to take advantage of the lingering effect after the peak battle with Wang Xianji to grab that rare enlightenment. He hoped that he could reach the sky in one step and directly enter the false realm of celestial phenomenon or even the land immortal. He wanted to learn from the Qi cultivators and obtain that fleeting and rare enlightenment. More haste, less speed. Moreover, Su Fengyan had experienced the false realm 3 times. Every time he ascended the realm, he should be walking on thin ice. Outsiders did not dare to imagine that someone would be as reckless as Su Fengyan. It was tantamount to courting death. Since he could not wake up, Su Fengyan actually laughed in the false realm that he did not know the depth of. Previously, he had brushed away the mountains and rivers. At this moment, he slowly hugged and gradually retracted all the mountains and rivers. It was said that it was easier to invite the spirit than to send it away. However, Su Fengyan found that the universe was completely reversed in this realm. Fortunately, he was not in a hurry. According to common sense, whether it was martial arts or the way of heaven, it was taboo to be unsettled. Su Fengyan simply did the opposite and let it go. Vaguely, Su Fengyan seemed to see Song Nianqing, who was holding a pair of cloth shoes, being carried into a carriage by a group of desolate sword pool disciples. He saw the back of a young girl kicking ahead. He saw a monk in a cassock flying over. He saw a white-clothed woman in a red robe returning and returning. Then, Su Fengyan's vision was instantly cast thousands of miles away. He saw a young and elegant Taoist priest guarding a grave. He also saw the ebb and flow of the South Sea. A middle-aged swordsman cleaved the waves with his sword. He also saw a horse that was neither a horse nor a deer climbing up the mountain and arriving in front of the Taoist master's mansion. Finally, he saw a young child squatting by the river in a daze outside a small village with beautiful scenery. Suddenly, he was enlightened and his spiritual qi overflowed. When he returned to the village and saw the red paper cut on a window, the child felt an inexplicable joy. Su Fengyan finally opened his eyes and wiped his face. Unknowingly, his face was covered in tears. Chapter 864. I still owe 5 chapters. There was a rider riding towards the Quicksnow Mountain Villa. The horse's hooves were light and agile. The young rider wore a red fox fur hat with 2 strands of black and white hair hanging down from his temples. There was a short knife in a black sheath at his waist. The rider and the horse were not in a hurry to enter the villa. Instead, they dismounted and walked along the bluestone boards beside the spring god lake. It was noon and the sun was warm. The winter snow had melted and the lake water was as clear as a mirror. There was an endless stream of people enjoying the scenery. The changes in the Quicksnow Mountain Villa were too much for the eyes to take in. There was a series of rumors. When the Zhenwu Great Emperor's Dharma form arrived at the lake, it was first the young master of the Yanbao Castle, Li Huili, who led an urgent military order to return to the border with his elite cavalry and squires. Then, Xiaolingzhen of the Spring Invitation Cottage also left the villa. Yuqi Liangfu said that this old senior from the cottage had comprehended something while watching the lake and wanted to return to Shu to cultivate in seclusion. There was a chance for her to reach the celestial state in this lifetime. Li Yibai of the Dongyue Sword Pool also said that he wanted to welcome his teacher, Song Nianqing, but his whereabouts were unknown. The Quicksnow Mountain Villa originally wanted to use the election of the Wulin Alliance to raise its reputation and status. With the departure of the three leaders one after another, it was about to become the laughingstock of the entire Jianghu. However, the appearance of the purple-clothed woman from Mount Hui, who had defeated 16 famous masters in a single day, was unparalleled in the limelight. It vaguely seemed like it wanted to take advantage of the situation to become the champion. This made many Jianghu people who were on their way back to the villa turn their horses around and rush into the Quicksnow Mountain Villa. This undoubtedly solved the urgent situation of the villa. If one didn't take a closer look, in this era where people relied on their clothes and Buddha relied on gold, a wandering swordsman with a saber on his horse was not eye-catching in the crowd. Most of the Jianghu people who could come to the Suishua Mountain Villa were heroes. Most of them relied on their sex background or their own names. Even if they couldn't be the richest in their hometown, they couldn't escape from being rich. Along the lakeside, there were plenty of Jianghu people wearing embroidered fox fur coats. If they didn't wear a mink hat that easily cost dozens of taels of silver, they would be too embarrassed to go out and greet others. Many beautiful women followed the heroes around, their eyes wandering, secretly comparing their wealth. There were also some Jianghu people who came with their wives and children. These people were undoubtedly more confident. Most of them were the direct descendants of the first and second-class sects in Jianghu. Those mischievous children who didn't have the slightest bit of stage fright ignored their parents' warnings and played around, as if they were passing through flowers to attract butterflies. Perhaps these children themselves didn't even know that there was a saying in the imperial court about the children of officials and the children of generals. They were equivalent to the children of aristocratic families in Jianghu. In the future, they would inherit their father's legacy and roam Jianghu. Obviously, they would be more successful than other people. The bustling Bluestone Road was filled with polite greetings from people who had long heard of their names, as well as people who were familiar with each other. A few pairs of children who happened to be good friends with their fathers quickly became familiar with each other. They ran amok together, laughing and chatting happily. Occasionally, they bumped into Jianghu people who were usually violent and ruthless, but today, they didn't mind putting on a rough smile and even reached out to rub the children's heads in a friendly manner. The children cleverly ran past with their heads bowed. Behind them, the helpless faces of their fathers didn't forget to cup their fists and smile at the men. If both sides were indifferent, they would pass by with a smile. If they were more clever, they would stop and exchange names. If it was convenient, they wouldn't have to spend a single copper coin to form a dispensable relationship. The group of children were like a few merrily swimming fish between the gaps of the crowd, becoming more and more intense. They had some foundation in lightness skill, so when they were in the mood, they unconsciously used their family's lightness skill. Coincidentally, someone was leading a horse and standing by the lake, looking at the vast and misty spring god lake. When the leading child was about to hit the horse's belly, he grabbed the horse's back with both hands and deftly flipped over, continuing to run forward. It was quite a stunning sight. Behind him, a young girl with long hair followed suit and flipped over the horse's back. The last child didn't have the same foundation, but he didn't want to take a detour, so he couldn't leap over and hit the horse's belly, falling to the ground. It wasn't clear whether it was because of the pain or because he felt that he had lost face in front of his childhood sweetheart, but he sat on the ground and wailed loudly. The young man with the red fox fur hat on his head heard the noise and let go of the reins. He smiled and reached out to help the child up. The child raised his head and looked at the stranger. Perhaps he thought that the stranger's smile was mocking him, so he cried even more heartbreakingly. The young master probably had a bad horse and fur hat, so he didn't have the air of nobility. That was why he was smiling so warmly and apologetically. He didn't know what to do when faced with the rowdy children who were rolling all over the ground. The two older children who had already leaped over the horse also turned back, eyeing the young man covetously. The boy who had leaped onto the horse first had a face full of anger. At such a young age, he already had a heroic air that couldn't be underestimated. The girl with drooping hair was a beauty, so her temper was also much gentler. Seeing that the culprit didn't look like a bad person, she only glared at him. Naturally, She was naturally charming and went to help her companion, who was covered in dust and mud. Although the child who was being helped up was crying loudly, in fact, he had been keeping his eyes and ears open. When his brother and sister came to support him, and his parents also quickly walked over behind him, he suddenly became bold. He ran over to the guy who was leading the horse and blocking the road and fiercely kicked that person's calf. The young master dismissed it with a smile and lowered his head to pat the dust off. He didn't expect that the child was still angry and slapped the person in front of him on the head, knocking off the fox fur hat that was obviously not worth much. Only then did he grin proudly. After the hat fell off, the young man in his 20s with a saber revealed a head of hair that was similar to the hair on his temples. It was actually the gray color of old age, giving him a lifeless appearance. The young man shook his head and didn't argue with the naughty child. He took a few steps forward and bent down to pick up the fox fur hat that they depended on each other for survival. Unexpectedly, a soft whip, like a snake spitting out its tongue, hooked onto the fox fur hat that was indeed cheap and unsightly in quality. The whip lifted up and threw the hat high up. Then, this whip, which was praised in Jianghu as a tiger's tail, was like a snake coiling around. The head of the whip and the body of the whip collided with each other, creating a sound like firecrackers. After the vibration, the whip suddenly straightened and bounced onto the fur hat, forcing the hat to fall back to its owner, which happened to cover the young man's head. This scene really lived up to the old saying that a virtuous horse would be bullied by others. The young man must have been shocked by the child's elder's move. Amidst the cheers of the surrounding people who wished for the world to be in chaos, he quietly stood up and straightened the fox fur hat. He didn't even glance at the strong man who was shaking his hand with the whip. Chapter 865. Seeing the young man retreating after causing trouble, the man whose family had been tyrannical for generations in Liaodong was too lazy to beat him up. He was born with a short stature, but his wife was tall and enchanting. Not to mention other things, just her slender legs almost reached his ribs. A woman of this height was rare even in the north, let alone in the south. What was even more remarkable was her well-proportioned body and her twin peaks. Even though she was wearing a thick fur coat, she was unwilling to be left out. Beside them were two pairs of celestial couples who had deep connections with their families. They were all in their 30s. The men were masculine while the women were graceful. When the four of them saw this scene, which could not be said to be harmonious, they looked at each other and smiled. They did not agree, but there was pity in their eyes. However, they did not say a word of justice for the young stranger. When roaming the Jianghu, one should help those close to him and not those who were reasonable. Almost no one noticed that the spineless young man quietly made an imperceptible gesture of waving his hand after leading the horse and before pressing down the fox fur hat. Except for Zhou Qinghu, who had been watching coldly, because this woman's eyes were fixed on Su Qi, whom she had met for the first time on the Dragon Tail slope. She could not understand how a man who could make dozens of big devils retreat in the face of difficulties, who could be invited by the devil cult to climb the mountain and be conferred the title of Marquis, could be so down and out. Zhou Qinghu hesitated for a moment and walked to the side of the man who continued to look at the bleak winter scenery of Spring Shin Lake. Su Zhan, who had been with her day and night these days, followed closely behind. Su Zhan, who carried an ancestral long stick on his back, walked a few steps and was quickly recognized by some sharp-eyed guys. These days, Snow Mountain Villa had set up several arenas on Springshin Lake that cost a lot of money. In addition to the main arena that was stolen by the purple clothes of Mount Hui Mountain, there were several smaller arenas which were also full of masters. Su Zhan amazed everyone in one of the arenas. He fought with an old swordsman in the northwest for 400 rounds and still won. Then he successfully defended the arena for 4 consecutive rounds before being defeated by the famous swordsman in the southeast, Xia Huaibai, who was thousands of miles above Su Zhan. Everyone suddenly remembered that Su Zhan's father, Su Dachu, had written observing skills scripture and was once one of the top masters in the world. Because of Su Zhan's skills, the declining Su family was regarded by many martial arts seniors, especially masters in the Tu Huai River, as the hope of the family's revival. The Liaodong swordsman, who was shorter than his wife, put away his soft whip. Seeing Su Zhan's sudden appearance, he thought for a moment and then laughed heartily. He took the initiative to ask, "Are you Su Zhan, young Master Su who carried forward the family's observing skills scripture?" Originally, Su Zhan did not have a good impression of these arrogant Jianghu heroes, but after being recognized, he still turned around, smiled and cupped his fists in return. He said, "I am Su Zhan. I have heard from my father's generation that the Feng family of Liaodong is full of masters. They can not only kill a tiger with one whip, but also have superb archery skills. Just the sound of pulling the bowstring can make birds startled and fall from the bough." When the illegitimate son of the Feng family of Liaodong heard these words, it could be said that he was tickled by Ma Gu, and it happened to tickle his itch. He felt comfortable all over. If it was someone else who flattered him, he would not take it to heart. But Su Zhan was different after all. He had profound knowledge that was not inferior to the Feng family of Liaodong. Su Zhan himself was also good at martial arts. In the future, he might not be unable to become a first-class master. Feng Maolin, who was famous only in the Liao and Liao regions, had excellent whip skills and archery skills. If the Feng family had not been disliked by Zhao Sui, the king of Jiaodong, it would not have been difficult for Feng Maolin to get a real power with his family's ability. This time, in order to avoid trouble, Feng Maolin did not take the Oxhorn Bow with him to find an opportunity to show his talent in the south to the Quicksnow Mountain Villa. Feng Maolin, who had not mastered the essence of the Feng family's whip skills, knew his own weight. It was very difficult for him to win many battles in a row like Su Zhan. It was difficult for him to stand out in Jianghu, but it was difficult for the sons of aristocratic families like Feng Maolin. Just because he was born of a concubine, he was suppressed by the son of the first wife. Practicing martial arts was a bottomless pit. A family with ambition to stand out in Jianghu could not take care of everything. Feng Maolin was like this, let alone the sons of ordinary families who practiced martial arts. The double expenses of medicinal materials to exercise their body, the double expenses of accumulating money or borrowing secret books, and the various expenses of moving famous masters to teach the family would make people speechless. Therefore, it was not bad for the sons of aristocratic families like Feng Maolin to practice martial arts. On the other side, Feng Maolin was trying to get close to Su Zhan. He introduced Su Zhan, who had become famous after one battle, to the husband and wife of the Feng family of Liaodong. They talked happily. Zhou Qin, who came to the young child who was standing still with his horse. He plucked up his courage and asked, "How did you change your personality? Why is your temper so good?" Su Fengyan turned his head to look at this old acquaintance of his in the Quicksnow Mountain Villa. He smiled and did not speak. Zhou Qin, who recalled that after surviving that series of dangerous situations, he realized that this young master with an obscure background did not seem to be a domineering person. No matter how Hu Chuanya rolled his eyes or provoked him, he did not see the slightest bit of anger. Zhou Qin, who glanced at the side of his face. For a moment he was absent-minded. The reason why he was so calm in everything was because he did not care about the ups and downs of his group of people. Looking at the ups and downs of others' honor and disgrace was like watching children playing. Zhou Qin, who felt a little bored when she thought of this. She turned her head and saw Su Zhan talking and laughing with that group of people. They called each other brothers, as if they regretted not having met each other earlier. During these days in the Quicksnow Mountain Villa, Zhou Qin, who had seen the fickleness of human nature. With Su Zhan's fame, she was lucky enough to live alone in a courtyard in the villa. People from all walks of life came to the courtyard to make friends. She could not rest for a moment. Su Zhan also beat around the bush. One time when they sat opposite each other and drank, he almost revealed his heart under the guise of alcohol. However, she still diverted the topic. Zhou Qin, who had a good impression of Su Zhan, who had gone through fire and water with her. Unfortunately, it was not the love between a man and a woman. Zhou Qin, who only wanted to take advantage of her youth to travel more in Jianghu and see more strange stories. It did not matter whether she was accompanied or alone. Perhaps one day, there would be a man who could make her fall in love at first sight. That would be the day she left Jianghu. There were 3 reasons why Su Fengyan returned to the Quicksnow Mountain Villa under the secret escort of the Men of Sacrifice. The first was to settle things with Lin Hongyuan of the Dragon Palace. She still owed him a Xian finger inscription. The second was to see if she could wait until the young hierarch Li Yufu to offer a toast to the wanderer He Zhu's grave on behalf of Miss He He. Then she would inform Li Yufu about the child's first enlightenment by the stream. The last was that according to the secret letter, Shenyuan Qingfeng had slaughtered his opponents in the main arena and seemed to be on the verge of winning the championship. Earlier he had promised to let her sit on the throne of the Wulin Union. If there was a chance, he would help her. Su Fengyan herself didn't have many thoughts about Jiang Hu, other than the fact that the old bastard of the Zhao family hiding in Mount Longhu was not dead yet, other than that battle in the Eastern Sea that he didn't know whether or not he could fight, and other than the fact that he still missed her and her at Mount Jiulu, he had nothing else to be interested in. Whether he was willing or not, he had to leave before the matter was over. Fortunately, this time he was going back to Beiliang with Su Xiao, who was waiting for him in Xiangfan. Chapter 866. Zhou Qinhu did not want to have too much to do with Su Qi, who was shrouded in clouds and mist. She glanced at the 2 strands of gray hair under his red fox fur hat and thought of an excuse to leave. In her heart, she had the natural sorrow of a woman. Those who practiced martial arts knew that thinking too much would consume one's qi and blood, which would not nourish one's bone marrow. However, Zhou Qinhu also knew her own limitations. The martial arts that she practiced would definitely not enter his eyes. While she was hesitating, she saw a young ranger with a wine pot hanging from his waist stride over. He slapped Su Qi's shoulder and laughed, calling out Su Qi's name. Then he turned to her and said respectfully, "Miss Zhou's yellow plum sword. I am Huang Liang, an anonymous disciple of Pure Heart Pavilion. Your reputation is like thunder in my ears." Su Fengyan saw Zhou Qinhu's puzzled look and explained with a smile, "Brother Huang is a friend I met on the way to the snowy hills. He is an old Jianghu man and has taught me many things by word and example. He is a kind person and is worth making friends with." In fact, Huang Liang had been quietly observing the situation from the side. When he saw Su Zhan being played by the group of heroes, he had completely lost the intention to greet him. He was afraid that he would get into trouble. But he did not expect that Zhou Qinhu, who had recently risen to fame along with Su Zhan, would take the initiative to walk to the side of the horse by the lake. Hearing Su Zhan say that he was kind, Huang Liang accepted all of it without any guilt. After Zhou Qinhu heard Su Fengyan's words, she greeted this rogue Jianghu ranger out of courtesy. Su Fengyan picked up the reins and prepared to ride along the lake to find Lin Hongyuan, who had once held an ivory tablet in his hand and pretended to be a ghost. In addition to the dispensable stone inscription finger, Su Fengyan also had a newly learned interesting secret that he wanted to test Lin Hongyuan face to face. However, before Su Fengyan had a chance to escape, Su Zhan and Deng Maolin had arrived with their companions. Obviously, the son of a concubine from the Feng family of Liaodong had given Su Zhan face. He took the initiative to ask his young son to apologize to Su Fengyan, and then said that he wanted to board a colorful boat to watch the new round of the purple dress battle on the lake. Several arenas were built on the lake several miles away from the lake, and the spectators had to take a boat to watch the battle. However, the number of boats was limited, so boarding a boat did not depend on money, but on one's status in Jianghu and family's reputation. Every boat had a famous prostitute from the brothels of Xiangfan City. In order to build up the popularity of the Snowy Heights, Villa Master Weiqi Liangfu had put in a lot of effort. Most of the spectators from Jianghu did not have the ability to board a boat, and could only rent a small boat to ride between the big boats. However, there was a huge difference between riding a small boat and riding a boat, and it was not a pleasant feeling to be inferior to others. On the way to the ferry, Su Fengyan learned that Feng Maolin was from a wealthy family in Liaodong through Su Zhan's concise but clever introduction. The other 2 pairs of immortal heroes came from similar backgrounds, one from the Huai family, and the other from the Southern Tang aristocratic family. There was an insurmountable gap between aristocratic families and aristocratic families, but for most of the people in Jianghu, it was not easy. It was like a prostitute, but an official prostitute was naturally more valuable than a private prostitute. When Huang Liang was traveling with Su Fengyan, there was nothing he did not know about astronomy and geography. But now, he was very cautious and nervous, and did not even dare to speak loudly, especially when he was interrupted by Deng Maolin before he could finish his self-recommendation. Huang Liang did not take it seriously and obediently followed behind the crowd. Taking advantage of the fact that the people in front of him could not see him, he put on a high and mighty air and cast sidelong glances at the people around him. When they boarded the boat, Su Fengnian was in a bit of a dilemma. He wanted to board the boat with the horse, but the little steward of Quicksnow Mountain Villa, who was in charge of all the affairs of the boat, did not take the Feng family of Liaodong seriously at all. How could he let a nobody from Jianghu bring an inferior horse to board the boat? Besides, did he know how much a seat could be sold for nowadays? This C-class boat cost 400 taels of silver, and it was priceless. Su Fengnian did not want to complicate things. After everyone had boarded the boat, he handed the horse's reins to a handyman of the villa, stuffed a piece of silver into his hand, and said, "I'm Zhu Jing from the Dragon Palace. Little brother, please inform a woman from the Dragon Palace named Lin Hongyuan that I'm on this C-class boat. If she has time, tell her to wait for me at this ferry." When the servant heard the words Dragon Palace, he immediately looked at the young man with a higher opinion. Dongyue Sword Pond, Chunty Cottage, and Wild Goose Castle left one after another. At this moment, the Dragon Palace was considered one of the top sects in the villa, and he could not afford to offend any of the people in it, even if they were just cats and dogs. He quietly restrained his arrogance, weighed the weight of the silver, and deliberately put on a troubled face. "Young Master Zhuo, I have a hard life. I may not be able to leave for a while, and I'm afraid that I will delay your important business." Su Fengnian did not change his smile, and handed over the second piece of silver. "Sorry to trouble you, little brother." He didn't expect that the young servant was also a quick-witted character. He pushed back the second piece of silver and said with a smile, "I have received 10 taels of silver from young Master Zhuo. I don't feel bad about the money, but I also want to take advantage of the opportunity to get some immortal aura. If I ask for more, then I will be seen as a man who is not content with money. Our Snow Mountain Villa has strict rules. If by any chance the steward finds out, he will break my hands and feet. Young Master Zhuo, don't worry. I will go and report to you. As for young Master's precious steed, this humble one will also have the stable feed it." This was the foundation of a noble family. A servant would be influenced by what he saw and heard, and his conduct would more or less reveal a sense of impartiality. Before the spring and autumn period, the people who sat on the dragon throne had changed one after another. The 10 great clans had always been able to rise and fall as the tide rose and fell. The reason why they were able to stand firm was because of the accumulation of all aspects behind the main branch and the side branch. Su Fengnian looked at the young servant who led the horse away. Suddenly, a thought came to his mind. Would such a guy, who was good at currying favor and was born in poverty, one day have a romantic relationship with a lady from a noble family like Yuchuan? Su Fengnian shook his head and turned back to board the boat. The double-decker colorful boat retracted its ladder, broke through the green lake, and slowly sailed toward the arena. Among the 7 or 8 colorful boats in the distance, 2 of them were 3-storied boats. Su Fengnian stood at the stern of the boat with his hands in his sleeves, silently resisting the bone-chilling breeze that caressed his face. Huang Liang was thick-skinned. Since he could not please the unapproachable couples, he went to play with the 3 children. The child who kicked Su Fengnian said he wanted to ride a horse. So, Huang Liang got down on all fours and let the child ride on his waist. Huang Liang smiled brightly. He looked like a dog. Su Fengnian used to laugh at Huang Liang's clumsy showing off in his mind, but this time he could not laugh. Zhou Qinhu could not stand the utilitarian laughter of Su Zhan and the others, so she came out to take a breath of fresh air and stood by the railing near Su Fengnian. Su Fengnian smiled and asked, "Miss Zhou, you have earned the name of Huang Mei Sword?" Chapter 867. At first, Zhou Qinhu thought he was mocking her, but seeing his calm smile and not knowing how to respond, she did not respond. Although she understood the ways of the world, she did not want to do things against her will and speak against her will. This made people feel that she was cold and distant. In fact, to be able to escort Huang Shang to the capital One could see that she was a warm-hearted and kind-hearted woman. Su Fengnian hid his hands in his sleeves and gently leaned on the railing. He squinted his eyes and smiled. When I was young, I always wanted to be a famous hero. I wanted to be the type where women would fall in love with me wherever I went. That's why I often discussed with my two elder sisters what kind of nickname we should use when we roam the Jianghu in the future. At that time, we wrote down dozens of names on a piece of paper, but we were not satisfied with any of them. They were either not imposing enough or too obscure. I also thought that it would be good to find a beautiful heroine to be my wife. Later, I found out that it was not easy to be a heroine. Practicing martial arts all year round, it was difficult to have tender skin. Not to mention other things. Just looking at how awe-inspiring she was when she rode a horse would cause her butt to have calluses. What's more, he had to worry about those followers who prostrated themselves under the skirt of a pomegranate. If by any chance he encountered a highly skilled flower thief, or a local hedonistic son of a rich family who was fond of heroines, it would be even more of a headache. I remember the first time I roamed Jianghu, I saw a famous one. Her makeup was so thick that you could smell it from miles away. Her entire body, from the hairpins on her face to the bracelets on her hands, from the clothes on her feet to the boots on her feet, she had a good background. Afterwards, I found out that every shop paid her at least 100 or 200 taels of silver every year. Over time, I did not believe in heroines. I felt that calling a woman a heroine was like scolding her. Zhou Qinhu smiled sweetly. Su Fengnian sighed. Jianghu is actually very similar to the old Western Shu. Before the world was in chaos, Shu was in chaos. The duck knows when the spring river is warm. When the central government is in turmoil, it will inevitably affect other places. Even before the central government is settled, Jianghu is already in a state of panic. Those large and small gangs in Jianghu find a husband early and enjoy life early. Those who marry late or not often do not have the family background to support them. Most of them will be bullied. From the small fish and shrimp of the fish dragon gang to the sword-making family of the Yuan Mountain Villa, none of them were spared. I heard that the young king of Jing and in Shangfan City is interested in taking a concubine. I don't know how long the Snow Mountain Villa can last. Zhou Qinhu suddenly went straight to the point and asked, "Young Master Su, may I ask if the Dongyue Sword Pond Cottage and Wild Goose Castle, leaving the villa together, has anything to do with you?" Su Fengnian asked in return, "Miss Zhou thinks so highly of me? Why don't you just ask me if I invited Great Emperor Jinwu?" Zhou Qinghu was about to speak when Su Fengnian smiled and said, "By the way, I'm temporarily a minion of the Dragon Palace in the old southern Tang Empire. My name is Zhu Jing. If someone asks about me in the future, Miss Zhou can answer this way." Zhou Qinhu nodded. Su Fengnian turned around and saw Huang Liang, who was crawling on the outside of the ship, with a calm expression on his face. Zhou Qinhu did not see the slightest fluctuation in his beautiful peach blossom eyes. Not to mention the reasonable disdain and ridicule, she did not even feel pity for him. Zhou Qinhu said his goodbyes and walked into the warm-as-spring cabin. Su Fengnian leaned on the railing again, feeling bored. So he softly hummed a nameless tune that was widely circulated in Beiliang. "Don't you see the fishes in the northern underworld swim for tens of thousands of miles? Don't you see the immortals at the peak of Kunlun pass through the Heaven's Gate? Don't you see the men riding lightly out of the cold and returning with their corpses? Don't you see the women leaning on the door until their hair turns white, since there were men of sacrifice secretly escorting him?" Su Fengnian did not deliberately suppress his sleepiness. He rested his chin on his sleeves that were still warm from his hands and closed his eyes. A small boat with a black canopy quickly cut across the calm lake. A woman dressed in green and holding a white hat leaped onto the colorful boat and stood at the other side of the stern. With a complicated look in her eyes, she called out softly, "Young Master Zhua." Su Fengnian opened his eyes and turned his head without turning around. "Young Palace Master Lin, I'm honored by your presence. Forgive me for not welcoming you." The young woman, who had never shown up in the Quicksnow Mountain Villa as Lin Hongyuan, now had a look of respect from the bottom of her heart. Compared to when they had first met, the look in her eyes was one of hatred. In Lin Hongyuan's mind, Zhao Ningxin was the reincarnation of the founder of the first generation of Longhu Mountain. He would definitely become the #1 person in the world in the future. With the addition of Yu Yiqing, he would have more weight than His Royal Highness in the bitter cold of the northern region. Lin Hongyuan was a woman who didn't remember good things or bad things. However, if she was really hit hard and hurt, she would still remember a little. Previously, when she got along with that bastard surnamed Su, her schemes were seen through every time. That guy wouldn't show any mercy to her. Now, Lin Hongyuan didn't know whether she hated him more or was afraid of him more. Lin Hongyuan, who had changed into the face of a female official of the Dragon Palace, was about to move. Su Fengyan said, "I received a secret report that the eldest son of Zhao Bing, king of Yanqi, was hiding in the team of the Dragon Palace. He should not be the bearded man. So you are really arrogant to let the crown prince carry the bed for you." Lin Hongyuan's face suddenly turned pale. Su Fengyan looked at the small boat with a black canopy following the colorful boat. Master Hao was an ordinary strong man. Su Fengyan waved to him. The young man hesitated for a moment and jumped onto the stern. After no longer hiding, he suddenly became high-spirited and heroic. He waved to Lin Hongyuan, making the woman who wanted to say something but hesitated to keep quiet. In the vast Nanjiang, Nalan Yusi could come and go as he pleased with Zhao Bing. King of Yanqi, only His Royal Highness favored him and regarded him as a friend of the same generation. In terms of reputation, this Zhao Zhu, His Royal Highness, was better than the first Prince Zhao Wu. If it was a few years ago, if anyone compared Zhao Zhu with Su Fengyan of Beiliang, it was tantamount to insulting His Royal Highness of King of Yanqi. Zhao Zhu grinned and said, "Xiaonian, do you remember the little beggar who wanted to learn sword from your mother in Dantong Pass?" Su Fengyan said flatly, "I don't remember." Zhao Zhu looked resentful. He squatted on the ground and bit his finger, sighing. Lin Hongyuan was flabbergasted. In Nanjiang, there was a secret message circulating in a small circle. It said that the reason why Mr. Nalan was willing to stay in King of Yanqi was that he liked Zhao Zhu's ambition to go north. Zhao Zhu joined the army at the age of 12. Ever since his father, the king, helped him build his first small tomb with several heads to show off his military exploits, Zhao Zhu had killed people like flies, gathered the corpses of his enemies, and sealed the tall tombs. In the past few years, he had built a total of 21 temples. All the barbarians in Nanjiang surrendered. Zhao Zhu's favorite thing to do was never to pretend to be cultured, but to secretly go south with dozens of retainers. Often, he would go and come back for a month, uprooting the enemy's strongholds hidden deep in the miasma, leaving no survivors. Every time His Highness didn't show up for a banquet or event, everyone immediately understood that His Highness had slipped away to slaughter people again. But at this time, facing Su Fengyan, Zhao Zhu didn't know why he was so gentle, respectful, and thrifty. He raised his head and said sadly, "Xiaonian, you're no longer the good brother who took off his pants to compare size with me." Su Fengyan scolded, "Is there a brother who owes money for more than 10 years and doesn't pay it back?" Zhao Zhu immediately laughed and threw a bag of copper coins to Su Fengyan. "Here. When we parted, you said that you wanted to be a hero. You also told me earnestly that I shouldn't become an old beggar. I've always remembered it in my heart. I didn't want to spend a single coin in this bag of copper coins." Su Fengyan caught the cloth pouch that was sewn together and was speechless. Chapter 868. The man surnamed Jiang almost vomited blood. Ji Lu En was the palace master of Dragon Palace, and Cheng Baishuang was the #1 guest. They were the top masters in Nanjiang. Lin Hongyuan had always had the reputation of young palace master Lin. Any one of them was an unattainable bodhisattva. The Jiang family didn't even have the time to burn incense and pray to God. How could they have the courage to provoke them? This surly man kept saying that he didn't know them. King don't know them, but you still said a bunch of catchy words. When the bigwigs of the Dragon Palace went out, there would be female officials holding ceremonial rites to clear the way. Moreover, this woman spoke in a familiar local accent, which made the man surnamed Jiang realize in hindsight. He had to remind the Feng couple not to overestimate themselves. Not only would they lose face, but they would also cause his family to be punished and ostracized so that they could not have a foothold in the southern Tang world. Who didn't know that Dragon Palace was Mr. Nalin's favorite maid? If the fairy-like Mr. Nalin heard it, his whole family would be drowned. Zhao Zhu pointed to the child in the woman's arms. You want to find Yuqi Liangfu to reason? No problem. Leave the baby and throw the body in front of Yuqi Liangfu. You will definitely be in the right even if you don't want to. Su Fengyan said. That's enough. The stern suddenly became silent. Zhao Zhu drank honestly, and Lin Hongyuan didn't say anything. Feng Maolin also understood the situation. After weighing the pros and cons, he chose to suffer in silence. He broke away from his friend's support and staggered back to the cabin. According to the cultivation method passed down from his ancestors, he operated his qi and breathed out the old and took in the new. Su Fengyan asked, Zhao Zhu, how did you become a beggar? I remember that at that time, although the dragon's descendants lived in fear, they didn't have to worry about food and clothing. Zhao Zhu threw the empty wine pot into the lake, rubbed his cheeks, and said with a smile, It's a long story. Anyway, now my brothers must be secretly wondering why I didn't starve to death in Dantong Pass. Every family had its own difficulties. Once it was mentioned, it would be awkward and painful. Lin Hongyuan stood in the distance and felt relieved. Since Su and His Royal Highness were old acquaintances, the key point was that anyone with a discerning eye could see that it was a genuine friendship and not a pretense of civility. Then whether or not he taught Su's secret steel inscription of the Dragon Palace was of no importance. He didn't need to worry about being caught by others in the future. However, Lin Hongyuan was a little disappointed. It seemed that he couldn't hope to make Su into a human puppet in this lifetime. Su Fengyan turned around and looked at this guy who was not in Nanjiang. Do you have nothing better to do than to be Lin Hongyuan's servant? Leaning on the railing, Zhao Zhu lazily said, I've never been in the pugilistic world, so I won't have any chances in the future. As for doing odd jobs for Lin Hongyuan, I'll just take it as learning from you that you have a tender heart for the fairer sex. I can't just walk around and say that I'm Zhao Zhu. Heroes of Jianghu, come and kill me if you can. Su Fengyan smiled knowingly. I have a deep understanding of this. Zhao Zhu softly said, I originally wanted to sneak a trip to Beiliang. I wanted to go to my aunt's grave and burn 3 incense sticks no matter what. My father also agreed and said that I'll take his share. However, it seems that I can't go. You also know that West Chu is about to be reinstated. My father temporarily decided to let me lead 8,000 elite cavalry north to loot a burning house. If you came 2 days later, we would have passed by each other. Su Fengyan self-deprecatingly said, It won't be peaceful again. I don't understand why Chao Chongqing wants to reinstate the country. Zhao Zhu gazed into the distance and said indifferently, It's not strange at all. It's just like how the people of the world don't understand why Uncle Su is still unwilling to betray Liang and directly defected to Northern Mang even though our Zhao family is making things difficult for your Su family. Su Fengyan smiled and said, Let's not talk about surrendering to Bei Meng. How many people can we bring with us? 300,000 cavalry. However, a person should still have a bottom line. Zhao Zhu turned around and leaned against the railing. He asked, Xiaonian, do you know what I admire the most about Uncle Su? Su Fengyan handed the half-empty wine pot to Zhao Zhu. Zhao Zhu raised his head and took a big gulp before throwing it to Lin Hongyuan. Su Fengyan said, Is it because he didn't draw a river to conquer? Zhao Zhu sighed heavily and said, After I took charge of the army alone, I often deduced the battle situation with Mr. Nalin. Every time, I was on Uncle Su's side and adopted the strategy of drawing a river to claim the throne. Without exception, I suffered a crushing defeat. At first, I thought that my calculation was not meticulous enough, but even last year I still lost. I admit that Uncle Su's cavalry, no matter how powerful they are, lost because they are still an isolated army, isolated scholars, isolated people, and isolated orthodoxy. Once they claim the throne, they will be isolated. If they don't claim the throne, they will disappoint many generals and soldiers. Once they claim the throne, they won't be conspicuous at first, but as long as they lose their irresistible morale, their decline will soon be exposed. Everyone will kick a man who is down. They won't even have the extravagant hope of making a comeback. Mr. Nayland once said that if a commoner wants to sit on the throne, he will have to wait for the cold people to get used to power. Therefore, it will take at least 300 or 400 years. Uncle Su was born at the wrong time. Otherwise, I would be chatting with the crown prince right now. Su Fengnian fell into deep thought. Zhao Zhu suddenly asked with a cold smile, Xiaonian, how did you become a clay bodhisattva without anger? Is it because Beiliang is too cold? Su Fengnian calmly said, back then, when Su Xiao pulled a group of people out of Liaodong, he couldn't do it without money. So he borrowed money from many people. Many people felt that the money couldn't be borrowed and would definitely be wasted. So they simply closed their doors and refused to visit. Only the Feng family and the other two families were thin-skinned at that time. They couldn't endure Su Zhao's pestering. Together, they gave him more than 60 taels of silver. Although Su Xiao secretly returned a few favors after he became famous, he still talked to me about the dozens of taels of silver. He said that it was more important than the 10,000 taels of gold that he would get in the future. If it weren't for those pitiful pieces of silver, he almost didn't have the determination to leave Liaodong. Zhao Zhu nodded and sighed. I understand. ##### this month's update. Last month I owed 5 chapters. This month I will slowly make up for it. In December I will go abroad for almost 10 days. Therefore my goal is not high. I will only write 1 chapter every day. The chapter of White Dragon Suit was not included in today's update. Therefore I still owe 4 chapters. Author's note. Shuesher is still Shuesher. Reading is like meeting people. Some people may find it boring at first, but they will continue to read. Occasionally, they will be very satisfied. Some people will be shocked at first sight. Then, they will continue to ask the woman to be otherworldly and put on airs like a fairy. Over time, they will be disappointed. Shuesher is a story of beads. Those who are even more impatient can just change the book and pick it up when they remember it. #### chatting while writing. If I don't promise to update, I won't break my promise. It's a very simple reason. However, after weighing the 2 options, I will either be scolded for not keeping my promise or have to calm down and write. After weighing the 2 options, I feel that it is more worth it to write more chapters. First, let me explain something. In the past, when I wrote books, there was absolutely no notice of absence. Of course, this is not a good thing. The last time I chatted with Jingguan, as well as on the phone with Tomcat, we talked about this point. I'm a writer who's publicly acknowledged to have a terrible character, but now I'm actually nagging someone about the unfairness of Unix and the importance of stable updates. Even I can't imagine it. If you want to say that I'm a good-for-nothing big shot, that I wasn't a big shot when I was an ambitious person, that God wasn't a big shot, that Ergu and Toad weren't big shots, to be honest, Shuesher is my least big shot work. Compared to the previous scams, I gave fewer promises and more notifications. I also had the most chapters. I also had the most interactions with readers. The number of times I clenched my teeth and persevered was undoubtedly the most. Therefore, if there are old readers who want to show off their superiority and tell you about the past, don't be in a hurry to scold them for being a brainless fan. You have to know that these brothers who appear to be impervious to fire and water have already been shot in the heart. They are just clenching their teeth and forcing a smile. Furthermore, there are many new people who have fallen into my trap. Sooner or later, they will unfortunately become one of them. Who knows what will happen in the future? Although I am an author, I am also a reader. The age of a web novel reader is almost twice that of an author. Therefore, I have never cared about pirated posts. This is because I read pirated posts myself. I don't have the right to give advice. At most, I use my identity as a second-rate, third-rate, or fourth-rate author to recommend works that I really like as a way to make up for it. If I have to say that I'm a big shot, it would be the overly impetuous readers. As always, I don't like them. It was the same when I was writing scams. Back then, I would often argue with readers in the comments section. I wouldn't stop even if I were to argue with them. However, I don't have the willpower and mentality anymore. Firstly, I feel that it is useless. No one can convince the other. Secondly, authors still rely on their works to prove themselves. Of course, This impetuousness isn't the scolding when the chapters are interrupted. It is the skimming through the contents of the chapters. There are many long-winded chapters in Snow. Even I find it annoying. Actually, they are all explaining things that have been hinted at. When you fill in the gaps, some people don't even realize it and only feel confused. The author can only helplessly do something superfluous, even sacrificing part of their reading habits. Previously, when they said that they are impatient to change their reading habits, they are referring to those who are obsessed with the content of the book. I can understand this small group of people, but I don't agree with them. In Snow, there are actually many climaxes of varying sizes.